The rope was old, Arizona rope. The kind that had no opinion about whether it held or let go. She was dangling over 200 feet of open air, arms bound, ribs cracked, the sun already beginning its slow work on her skin. Below, nothing. Above, the canyon rim empty, indifferent. Then, hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, not running toward her. Walking. A black stallion appeared at the edge of the rim. Cold dark, a scar like forked lightning across his left shoulder. He looked down at her, the way nothing wild had any right to look at anything. He took the rope in his teeth and pulled. Somewhere in Dusthaven, a man in a perfect vest checked his gold watch and smiled. He had been waiting 2 years for this particular silence. He did not yet know the silence had already broken. The first thing Elara Cross felt was the rope. Not the heat, not the pain, the rope. It bit into her ribs like a brand pressed too long against skin, cinched so tight she could only breathe in small measured sips. Half a breath, hold. Half a breath again. Her eyes opened to a sky that had no business being that beautiful. Pale gold bleeding into deep orange at the edges. The kind of sunrise Thomas used to wake her for. Thomas. She did not think about Thomas, not yet. Her body swayed. A slow, horrible pendulum motion caused by nothing more than the desert wind deciding to shift directions. Her arms were pulled behind her back and bound at the wrists with a strip of leather so tight she could no longer feel her fingers. Her legs hung loose below her. Useless. The rock face pressed cold and rough against her left cheek every time the wind pushed her that direction. She was dangling over the edge of Redstone Canyon. Below her, nothing. Just open air and the distant suggestion of broken stone 200 feet down. Elara Cross did not scream. Not because she was brave. She would sort out whether she was brave later, if there was a later. She did not scream because screaming used air she could not afford to waste. Because the walls of Redstone Canyon were limestone and sandstone and empty space, and a scream would do nothing but frighten the hawks. She breathed instead, in out, in out. Her fractured memory came back in pieces, the way a broken mirror gives back a reflection. Not all at once, shard by shard. Yesterday afternoon, the western fence line. She had been riding out to check the posts along the canyon rim, the same ride she made every 2 weeks, the same ride she had made alone every 2 weeks for 2 years. The red dirt under her mare's hooves, the heat pressing down from above like a flat iron on cloth, the smell of creosote and dry rock, the boot prints. She had noticed them first near the second post. Deep, deliberate, pressed into a patch of ground still damp from the spring that bled up through the limestone there. A large man, heavy, wearing boots with iron-reinforced soles, the kind that left an edge like a brand rather than a simple scuff. Not a ranch hand's boot, not a traveler's boot, the boot of a man who expected rough terrain and planned for it in advance. She had stopped her mare, looked around, the canyon rim, the scattered sage, the boulders that had always looked like crouching animals in the late afternoon light. And then, nothing. Then the inside of her own skull. She had no memory of the blow, only the absence that followed it. A long dark nothing, and then this. The rope, the canyon air, the sunrise she had not asked for. The rope shifted. Elara forced her head up and looked. The anchor point was above her, somewhere past the lip of the ledge she had evidently been thrown from. 20 feet of worn rope between her and whatever knot or rock outcropping was holding her weight. The fibers were dry. Old, not new rope brought for this purpose. Rope that had been here, perhaps waiting, or rope that someone had found useful and repurposed without much care for its condition. That was useful information. She filed it away. Her wrists throbbed. Her ribs screamed with every inhale. Dehydration was already beginning its slow work, a dull ache behind her eyes, a thickness on her tongue that tasted of dust and copper. She did not know how long she had been unconscious. Long enough for the sun to climb well past the horizon. Long enough for the temperature to have shifted from cold dark to hot bright. Long enough for no one to have found her. She thought about that. Then she stopped thinking about it, because there was nothing useful to be done with that particular thought. She thought instead about the rope, about how much weight it could bear, about whether a woman of her size, with her arms bound and her body swinging gently in the Arizona wind, could find any purchase on the cliff face. Whether she could work her wrists loose if she had an hour. Whether she had an hour. And then she heard the hoofbeats. She almost did not recognize them. Her mind had been so focused on the arithmetic of the rope, the wind, the stone, that the sound took a moment to resolve itself into something meaningful. But there it was. Slow, measured, unhurried. The sound of hooves on hard ground moving along the canyon rim above her. Elara tipped her head back. Her vision swam from the shift in blood pressure, the world tilting sideways before it settled again. She blinked, squinted against the glare. 3 horses appeared at the edge of the rim. They came out of the light and the dust the way things in the desert sometimes appeared, as if they had always been there and simply chosen now to be seen. A chestnut mare, a grey gelding with a coat the color of old pewter, and behind them, moving to the front with an unhurried authority that had nothing to do with speed, a black stallion, enormous, coal dark from muzzle to tail. His coat caught the early light and gave nothing back. A scar ran across his left shoulder, thick and pale, shaped like forked lightning, like something had tried to mark him, and he had survived the marking. His mane was untrimmed and heavy, moving in the wind like a banner. He walked to the rim and stopped. He looked down at her. Wild horses did not do this. Elara knew horses. She had grown up with horses, married a man who loved horses, spent 2 years running a cattle operation largely on horseback after Thomas died. She knew how wild horses behaved at the sight of a human being in distress. They startled. They fled. They put as much distance as possible between themselves and whatever strange, inexplicable thing was happening. They did not stand at canyon rims and look down at dangling women with that particular quality of stillness. She stared up at him. He stared down at her. The other 2 horses flanked him, positioning themselves just behind and to either side, as if they were following some instruction she could not hear. The black stallion moved his head, not away, toward the rope. His nostrils flared. He stepped forward, deliberate as a man stepping through a doorway, and lowered his muzzle toward the line where the rope met the rock. Elara stopped breathing. He took the rope in his teeth, not mouthing it the way a horse explores an unfamiliar object, not playing. He gripped it, found his footing, spread his front hooves wide against the rimrock and pulled. The rope jerked. Elara's body lurched upward 2 inches, 3 inches. Her shoulder slammed into the cliff face and pain detonated through her left side, bright and clarifying. She bit down against the sound that wanted to come out of her throat. If she startled him, if she made a noise that sent him skittering back, he adjusted his grip. The gray and the chestnut moved behind him, not pulling but pressing, giving him something to lean into, as if they understood the geometry of the problem. The rope moved again, 6 inches, 8. Her hip bone scraped across the rock and she tasted blood where she had bitten her cheek. The sky tilted. The world went gray at the edges. She was losing blood flow to her head, had been for a while now, and the slow dark tide was rising. She fought it, kept her eyes on him. The black stallion pulled and braced and pulled again. Methodical, unhurried, as if he had done this before, or as if he simply intended to do it until it was finished, which came to the same thing. Her waist reached the ledge. The rope had lifted her enough that the outcropping she had been hanging from was now level with her midsection. She got her knee up, got it over. The rock scraped through her dress and tore at the skin beneath, and she did not care. She got one knee up and then pushed, used the last of whatever was left in her arms and her core, and the stubborn, unreasonable part of her that had been running a ranch alone for 2 years, and she rolled. She landed face down on the flat rock of the canyon rim. She lay there. The limestone was already warm from the sun. It smelled of dust and minerals and the faint animal scent of the horses above her. She heard their breathing, heard the shift of weight, hoof on stone. She turned her head. The black stallion stood 3 feet away, not retreating, not startled. His dark eyes were fixed on her face with an attention so direct, so intent, that she felt the full weight of it even through the pain and the spinning dark at the edges of her vision. She thought, "He can't be real," she thought. "But my knee is bleeding and the rope is still around my waist," she thought. "You're not supposed to be real." And then the dark that had been waiting at the edges of her vision came all the way in, and Elara Cross stopped thinking entirely. She woke to the smell of carbolic acid and dried lavender. Medical smell. Familiar in the way that unpleasant things become familiar through repetition. She had smelled it in this same room before, twice, once when she had burned her arm badly enough to need wrapping, and once 2 years ago when they had brought Thomas back and laid him on the table, and Clara Reed had looked at Elara with an expression that tried very hard to be professional. Elara opened her eyes. Whitewashed ceiling, The crack she had memorized running from the northeast corner toward the window. Afternoon light coming through the calico curtain, softened, warm. A candle on the table even though it was not needed. She turned her head and found Clara seated beside her, glasses pushed up on her nose, reading something in a medical journal with the focused attention of a woman who took continuing her own education seriously, even when no institution in the Arizona territory would grant her a certificate for it. Clara looked up. She did not say thank God. She did not flutter. She 3 ribs. Cracked, not broken. You'll breathe through it. Wrists are abraded to the 2nd layer. Mild concussion. You were dehydrated enough that I'm surprised you're coherent right now. I'm coherent, Elara said. Jury's still out. Elara tried to sit up. Clara put a hand on her shoulder. Firm, not a suggestion. Hank Pruitt found you, Clara said. Followed your mare back. She came home without you and he had the sense to go looking. How long? You were out there about 6 hours by my estimate. 6 hours. The sun would have been fully up. The canyon walls would have turned the heat back and forth between them like a conversation. 6 hours suspended over open air in the Arizona summer. The horse, Elara said. Clara tilted her head. The horse, black stallion. There were 3 horses, wild on the rim. The black one she stopped, because even saying it, she could hear how it sounded. He pulled me up. Clara's expression did not change, which was its own kind of answer. Hank found you on the rim. Alone, no tracks, he said, except yours. That is not possible. You had a head injury in 6 hours in the heat, Elara. Clara. Elara met her eyes. I know what I saw. The door opened. Harlan Voss stepped into the room. He was, as always, immaculate. Black wool vest over a white shirt so clean it seemed to generate its own light. Gold watch chain looped across the vest front. The weight of the watch a comfortable pull in the pocket it called home. His hat was in his hand. His expression was concern, calibrated to the proper degree, not excessive, not insufficient. 52 years old, Harlan Voss. In Dusthaven since before Elara had come as a bride. He owned the largest parcel of land in the county. He had financed the general store expansion, and the new well at the north end of town, and the salary of 2 of Mayor Tuck's staff. He attended church every Sunday in the front pew. He stood in the doorway of Clara's back room and looked at Elara with the warm concern of a neighbor, a community member, a man who simply could not help but care about the people around him. But Cross, he said. Terrible news travels fast in a small town. I hope I'm not intruding. He was intruding, Mr. Voss, Elara said. I am so relieved to see you awake. He moved into the room with the ease of a man accustomed to entering spaces as though he owned them, which in several cases in Dusthaven he literally did. This country is unforgiving. The canyon rim is no place for a woman riding alone. I've ridden that fence line alone for 2 years. Yes. A pause, considerate, measured, which is exactly why I've worried. A property the size of yours, without proper staffing, without the support you need. He turned the hat in his hands once, a gesture that managed to look like humility. My offer stands, of course. It has always stood. $400 for the western parcel. You could take rooms in town, live comfortably. Elara looked at him. She said nothing for a long moment. Just looked. Then thank you for your concern, Mr. Voss. Please close the door on your way out. Something moved behind his eyes. Quick! Gone. He smiled. Put his hat back on. Of course. You rest. At the doorway he paused because men like Harlan Voss always paused at doorways. This territory is dangerous for those without protection, Mrs. Cross. I do hope you'll give that some thought. He left. The door closed. Clara stood with her back to the wall, arms crossed, saying nothing. Elara stared at the ceiling. He came very fast, she said. He was in the general store when Hank rode in, Clara said carefully. Convenient. The word sat in the room between them like a stone dropped in still water. Neither of them said anything else about it. Clara refilled the water glass and said, as if it were a small thing, that Wade Calloway had come to Dusthaven after his wife died. Eleanor. That he had left whatever he was before and taken the smallest post he could find, and that she had always understood this as a particular kind of grief. Deputy Hank Pruitt came by an hour later, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the way men who had done something frightening sometimes looked afterward. When the fear had settled into relief and the relief had curdled slightly into the awareness of how close a thing it had been. He was 55 and built like a fence post, lean and weathered and stubborn about staying upright. He had been deputy under 2 sheriffs before Wade Calloway came to Dusthaven 18 months ago. and he had outlasted both of them through sheer persistence. "Found the mare at your gate, Mrs. Cross," he said. "She was lathered. Didn't sit right with me." He looked at his hat. "Found you on the rim. You were face down and I thought—" He stopped. "Thank you, Hank. Somebody hit you." "Not a question." "Yes. The ground near where I found you had been disturbed. I didn't find much in the way of tracks. Whoever it was knew how to move. But I found this." He reached into his vest pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out with 2 fingers like it might bite him. Elara unfolded it. A rough sketch, done in pencil, quick and confident. The outline of a property, the creek line, the canyon rim marked with a series of small X marks. Her property, the Cross Ranch. The western parcel that Voss had been trying to buy for 2 years. Written across the bottom in thick black ink. Done. She folded the paper and held it. The paper was dry, unmarked by sweat or soil. It had not been on the ground long. It had been left there deliberately, or dropped by someone in a hurry who did not care about being careful because they expected no one to be looking. "Where's Calloway?" she said. "Office, most like." She moved to get up. Clara put a hand on her shoulder for the second time. This time Elara let herself be stopped. Not because she agreed. Because she was calculating in the morning, Clara said. "The morning," Elara agreed. She spent the night in Clara's back room, on the narrow cot with the springs that creaked. She did not sleep well, which was not unusual for her, and she used the sleepless hours the way she had learned to use them. She lay in the dark and she thought. She thought about the boot prints. She thought about the rope. Old rope. Arizona rope. Left there, or brought there, or already there from some previous purpose. And if from some previous purpose, whose? She thought about Harlan Voss and his perfect timing and his gold watch and the way he stood in doorways. And she thought about the black stallion, the scar on his shoulder, the absolute unnerving calm of his attention. Because she had not imagined him. She was certain of that in the way she was certain of things that mattered, with her whole chest, not just the thinking part of her mind. She had been conscious enough to feel the rope move, conscious enough to feel her body rising, conscious enough to taste the limestone dust when her knee scraped across the rim. She had not imagined that. At some point before dawn she slept briefly and dreamlessly, and when she woke the light was still gray and the town was still quiet and she felt, strangely, sharper than she had the night before. She dressed carefully. The process was slow and more painful than she preferred to acknowledge. Her ribs had stiffened overnight, and each arm movement required a specific, deliberate negotiation with her own body, a request she would submit and wait to see whether it was approved. The teal working dress, dark enough to hide dust, with the high collar and the 6 buttons at the wrist that Thomas had always said were impractical, and she had always thought were simply sensible. Her leather belt, worn to softness, with the small holster on the right side where she kept the navy Colt she had carried since the 2nd year of widowhood, when she realized that competence at shooting and willingness to be seen doing it were 2 different things, and she was prepared to demonstrate both. She braided her hair, wound it and pinned it, put on her boots, the tall ones with the stacked heel that Clara said were impractical for a woman in her condition, and she said were the only boots she owned, which was not strictly true but was true enough. Then she went to find the piece of paper she had hidden the night before. Not the note, the other one. 3 weeks before any of this, before the boot prints and the rope and the dawn she had woken up without a body plan for still being alive, Elara had found something in Thomas's things. She had been going through the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, looking for the deed copy she kept there alongside the land survey papers, and she had found at the bottom, beneath everything, a small leather document case she had not known existed. Inside it, a hand-drawn map. Thomas's handwriting. She knew his handwriting the way she knew the creek sound and the smell of the ponderosa pines on the north ridge. He had drawn the map in ink, carefully, without hurry. It showed the Western Canyon area, the old Cartwright mine, the creek that ran behind the property line. And in the corner, in letters so small she had needed to tilt the page toward the window to read them, HV. The Cartwright mine. Do not trust. Not quite those words. Thomas had written it in the shorthand he used for himself for his own notes, a compressed version of thought that she had spent 8 years learning to read. But the meaning was clear enough. HV. The Cartwright mine. Do not trust. HV. Harlan Voss. She had found the map and sat with it for an afternoon, and then folded it back into the leather case and put it in the hidden place at the back of the wardrobe where she kept things that needed keeping. She had told herself she needed to think before she did anything. She had told herself she needed to be certain. She had told herself 2 years had already passed, and a few more days would not change anything. 3 weeks later, someone had put her on a rope over Redstone Canyon with a note that said done. She took the map from the wardrobe. She folded it small and put it in the inside pocket she had sewn into the bodice of her dress last winter, a pocket Thomas had not known about because it had not existed when he was alive. A practical modification for a woman who had learned that pockets were not decorative. Then she picked up her hat and her gloves and went out into the early morning of Dusthaven, Arizona territory. The town was just beginning to wake. The blacksmith's fire was lit, a thin ribbon of smoke rising from the far end of the main street. The mercantile's front step had been swept but not yet unlocked. A dog was conducting thorough research on something near the water trough. The sheriff's office occupied the building's second from the western end of the street. Board and batten construction, a single window with glass in it, which had been a deliberate choice and a notable expense. There was a lantern burning inside. She pushed open the door. Wade Calloway was at his desk. Not sleeping at his desk, the way some men might be found at this hour. Actually working. Papers arranged in front of him with the systematic logic of a man accustomed to organizing information for purposes that mattered. A coffee pot on the small iron stove in the corner. A rifle on the rack, cleaned recently. The badge, the silver star, pinned to his vest in the usual place, slightly off-center, in a way that seemed more like an unwillingness to fuss than inattention. He was 42 years old, Wade Calloway. Lean in the way that fieldwork creates. Muscle without bulk. Economy without waste. His hair had gone to salt and pepper at the temples, and he appeared to have made his peace with this. He had the face of a man who had spent a significant number of years in the sun and wind, and had not been surprised by any of it. Brown eyes. A mouth set in a habitual seriousness that was not unfriendliness exactly. More like a man who had learned to put his words in careful order before spending them. He had been in Dusthaven 18 months. Before that, a Pinkerton agent for 11 years. Before that, she did not know, and she had not asked, and he had not offered. He looked up when she came in. He did not say you should be in bed. He did not say Mrs. Cross. What a surprise. He looked at her for a moment, reading something in her face or her posture or the way she was standing, and then he pulled out the chair on the other side of the desk. She sat down. She took the map out of her pocket and put it on the desk between them. He looked at it without touching it first. Then he picked it up and read it in the careful, unhurried way of someone taking information seriously. He put it down. He said, "What do you want to do? Not what do you think this means? Not are you sure this is genuine? Not maybe we should wait and see." He said, "What do you want to do?" And he looked at her with the flat, direct attention of a man who was actually asking. Elara Cross had not been asked that question, about anything that mattered, in longer than she could precisely calculate. "I want to know what Thomas knew," she said, "and I want to know who put me on that rope." He looked at her. "I believe those are likely to be the same investigation," he said. "Yes." He set the map down. He stood and crossed to the stove and poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot, without asking whether she wanted one. He set one in front of her and remained standing looking at the map. "There's been activity out near Cartwright Mine," he said finally. "Months of it, wagons at night. I've had reports from 2 ranchers whose properties back up against that land. I sent a written report to the county seat 8 months ago." He paused. "I have not received a reply." Elara watched his face. "Mayor Tuck," she said. "Mayor Tuck owes Harlan Voss a sum that would be uncomfortable to name aloud," he said simply. "I've known that for a year." Then the county seat report was intercepted, likely, which means the formal reporting structure is compromised, which means he confirmed, "We cannot rely on it." This had the quality of a man reciting a fact he had arrived at previously, and had not yet found a way around. Not defeat, just an honest accounting of the terrain. The front door opened. Harlan Voss came in, not alone. Mayor Orville Tuck followed him, breathing slightly harder than his exertion warranted, his face arranged in the expression of a man who wants to look decisive and has been practicing. Behind both of them, 2 men Elara recognized as Voss's regular employees, large, still. Hands nowhere near their guns, but the potential of the guns very present in the room. Voss looked at Elara. His eyes moved to the map on the desk. He smiled. "Warm, neighborly, Mrs. Cross." I hope you're feeling better. I heard you were resting. I was, she said. Calloway. He turned to Wade. I've been hearing some concerning things. It seems our neighbor here may be suffering more effects from yesterday's ordeal than we realize. These head injuries can be tricky. He shook his head with a particular quality of sorrow. I'd hate to see the sheriff's time wasted pursuing what amounts to the distressed imaginings of a grieving woman. Mayor Tuck nodded. On cue, like a man who had been told to nod. The room was quiet. Elara did not look at Voss, she looked at Wade. Wade was looking at Voss. He said, I appreciate you stopping by, Mr. Voss. Voss waited. I'll be pursuing this through proper procedure, Wade said. As I always do. Voss held the smile for a moment longer than necessary. Then he set his hat more firmly on his head and said, Of course. Good morning to you both. He took Tuck with him when he left, a man collecting something that belonged to him. The door closed. Elara picked up her coffee, she said. He saw the map. He did, Wade said. He'll act quickly now, yes. She nodded once, set the cup down. Looked at the window, the light coming through it, the early morning of a town that did not yet know what was moving through it. That evening she rode back to the Cross Ranch alone over Clara's objection. She changed into her riding clothes, a divided skirt in dark wool, and a plain white shirt with the sleeves she could roll, with her vest buttoned over it against the chill that was already coming into the evening air. She fed the horses. She checked the perimeter, what was left of it, every post and wire, moving through the familiar work with the muscle memory of 8 years. Then she went to Thomas's study and sat at his desk and lit the lamp and opened the seated chest where she kept the property documents. She found the original survey papers, the deed, the tax receipt from the previous year paid and stamped, and beneath all of that, at the very bottom of the chest, another item she had not put there. A second leather document case, different from the first, newer. The leather smelled different, less worn, more recently oiled. Inside it, a second hand-drawn map, larger than the first, more detailed. More recent, she thought, because Thomas's hand in the last years of his life had developed a small tremor in the letter loops, and she could see that tremor in this map's legend, barely there but present. This map showed the Cartwright mine in more detail. Internal passages sketched in, a loading dock area marked, a specific corridor labeled with initials she did not immediately recognize, and in the margin, in Thomas's most compressed shorthand, witnesses, SG, documentation removed to mine, HV and DA both present. March 1880. I am writing this in case I cannot. The entry stopped. She read it 3 times. March 1880. 2 years and a month before Thomas had ridden out to the canyon rim and not come back. DA, she did not know that initial SG. She did not know that one either. But she knew March 1880. She knew it because that was the month Thomas had come home from a supply ride to the county seat, unusually quiet, and when she had asked him what was wrong, he had said nothing, and she had believed him because she was tired, and because she trusted him, and because she had no reason yet to think that trust might mean being protected from something rather than included in it. She sat with the lamp and the map for a long time. Outside, the desert settled into the specific silence of a place where sound traveled far and the absence of it meant something. The horses moved in the corral. A coyote announced itself from the ridge, was answered by another further off, and then something else. A sound that was not desert sound. A presence at the edge of what she could sense, some instinct drawing her eyes to the window before she had consciously decided to look. She turned. At the window, visible in the pale last light, a shape, big, darker than the darkness around it. A head lowering gently toward the glass, breath clouding in the cooling air. The black stallion, standing at her bedroom window, the scar on his shoulder catching the lamplight from inside, his eyes finding hers through the glass with that same direct, specific attention, that quality of intention that had no name in any horse behavior she had ever observed or learned. He was not standing randomly. She understood this without being able to explain it, the way she sometimes understood things about the ranch that she could not articulate, things about water or weather or the animals in her care. He was not standing randomly. He was standing in the precise location where she had found boot prints after Thomas died. The prints she had shown to the sheriff, the old sheriff who had looked at them with polite patience, and told her that the canyon rim saw all manner of foot traffic, and she should not read too much into unmarked boots. The black stallion stood where the man had stood who had watched the night Thomas died. Elara put her hand flat on the window glass. He did not move away. She took the map and she folded it and she put it with the first map in her bodice pocket. Then she took Thomas's journal, the small leather one that had lived in the desk drawer, and she opened it to a blank page and she wrote. She wrote down everything she knew. The maps, the initials, the dates, the rope and the note and Voss's smile and the way Mayor Tuck nodded on cue like a man afraid to miss his mark. The boot prints old and new. The black stallion and what he had done at the canyon rim and where he was standing now. She wrote it all down because Thomas had not written enough of it down. He had written in fragments and shorthand, and the compressed private code of a man who thought he had more time. She was not going to make that mistake. When she was done, she looked up. The window was empty. The stallion had gone back into the desert dark. She closed the journal. She put it in the pocket she had sewn herself, the one Thomas did not know about. Then Elara Cross blew out the lamp and sat in the dark of her husband's study, in the house her husband had built, on the land her husband had died for without telling her why, and she did not cry. She planned. She was dressed before the stars went out, not because she had planned to be, because the alternative was lying in Thomas's bed in Thomas's house, staring at the ceiling that Thomas had plastered with his own hands in the summer of 1875, and she had done enough of that in the 2 years since he died to last the remainder of her life. So she dressed. Dark teal working dress, the deep-pocketed one. Her leather belt wound twice because her ribs were still wrapped underneath, and she needed the reminder to breathe carefully. Boots laced tight, hair braided before she was fully awake, her fingers knowing the pattern without requiring her mind to supervise. She made coffee. She drank it at the window where the black stallion had stood the night before. The ground there was undisturbed. No hoofprints. Same as Pruitt had said about the canyon rim. And she had stopped finding that surprising. She put the cup in the basin. She picked up her hat and her gloves and the maps from the inside pocket of yesterday's vest, transferred them to today's, and went out into the not-yet morning of Dusthaven, Arizona territory. The town was in that specific suspended state between night and day when it belonged to neither. The blacksmith's fire not yet lit, the main street empty except for a dog conducting its usual research near the water trough. The sky above the eastern ridge, the color of a bruise healing, purple going gray, going the first faint suggestion of gold at the edges. She walked to the sheriff's office. She did not wonder whether Wade would be there. She had noticed, in the 2 days she had known him, that he appeared to operate on a schedule that bore no relationship to conventional sleeping hours. The light was on when she arrived. The coffee pot on the stove. The papers on his desk rearranged from the night before, which meant he had been working them, which meant he either had not slept or had slept briefly in the chair by the door and resumed. She pushed the door open. He looked up, not startled, not surprised, the look of a man who had been half expecting an interruption and was not displeased it had arrived. She sat down across from him without being invited, which she had also stopped doing after the first visit. The chair was hers now in the practical sense that she occupied it when she needed to, and he had not suggested otherwise. She put both maps on the desk, the original from the leather case at the bottom of the cedar chest, and the second one, the newer one with Thomas's tremoring letter loops, the one she had found the night of the rope, side by side, smoothed flat. Wade looked at them without touching them first, reading them the way he read everything, systematically from the outside edges in. The second map, he said. Found it the night I came home from Clara's, underneath the first document case. Different leather, newer oil. He picked it up. His eyes moved over Thomas's marginal notes with the focused economy of a man accustomed to reading compressed information quickly. He put it down. SG, he said. You know that initial, Seth Garner. He said the name with the specific flatness of someone placing a name they had been worrying about. Clerk of the county court. He processes deed filings, land transfers, tax assessments. He has been absent from his post for 12 days. His landlady reported it. I sent a wire to the county seat. He paused. Was told he had requested leave. She looked at him. Did he? Seth Garner has not missed a day of work in 7 years. He moved the second map slightly, aligning it with the first. His room was undisturbed, shaving kit in place. The way a room looks when a man expects to come back to it. The silence in the office had change quality. It had been the silence of a working room. Now it was something with more weight in it. DA, she said. The other initial. Thomas wrote HV and DA both present, a pause that was not hesitation, consideration. Dean Alcott, he said. Carefully, the way you named something capable of damage. He manages Voss's operations. Acquisitions, transport, arrangements that require someone willing to make them. He looked at the map. He is a large man, heavy, likely wears iron-soled boots for rough terrain. She thought about the boot prints on her fence line, deep, deliberate, 4 centimeters into earth that should have been firmer. He was on my property before the rope, she said. Before and possibly after, Wade said. He would have been the one who went back to confirm. Confirm. The word sat on the desk between them like something that had been dropped there. She organized it aloud, the way she organized fence repair priorities, by sequence and weight. Voss has been using the Cartwright mine for something ongoing. Thomas witnessed a transfer in March of 1,880 and documented it. Seth Garner found corresponding irregularities in the deed records and was removed before he could act on them. Voss needs the Cross property not just to silence the witness but to control the Western Road access. She looked at Wade directly. You already worked that last part out. Not a question. When I pulled the county survey maps last month, he said, your western parcel is the only direct route to the border canyon roads, without going through the county seat road. Without your land, every wagon adds 3 hours and passes within sight of at least 4 ranches. You didn't tell me. I was building a case, with no one to build it with. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that acknowledged something. I sent a formal report to the county seat 8 months ago, he said. No reply. Because the reporting chain runs through structures Voss has already reached. He picked up his coffee, looked at it without drinking it. Every door I have tried has been built by the same man. I have been standing in his architecture for 18 months trying to find a wall he didn't put there. She heard it then, underneath the professional accounting of facts. Something that had been sitting with him long enough to have settled into his posture. You left Pinkerton, she said, not an accusation. An opening. A small one. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might leave it there. Then he said, my wife died while I was in New Mexico. Short. The sentence of a man who had learned to say it without flinching. Who had said it enough times to know that no particular inflection made it more or less true. Eleanor, she said. She had heard the name from Clara. Saying it back to him felt important. Something in his face. Small, the way a door moved in a draft, barely. She was ill for 3 weeks before it went serious, he said. I had been gone 4 months. When I came back, she had been buried for 6 days. He looked at the map. Not seeing it, she thought. Seeing something further back. I left the agency that week. Came here because they needed someone, and here seemed as far from everything as I could get while still being useful. She understood this. The impulse to put yourself somewhere small enough that your absence from the important place wouldn't keep announcing itself. She had done a version of it herself. Stayed on the ranch when she could have gone to her sister in Colorado. Stayed because leaving felt like admitting Thomas was gone, and staying felt like some form of continuation she could not articulate but needed. Thomas came home quiet in March of 1,880, she said. I asked him what was wrong. He said nothing. She looked at her hands on the desk. I believed him, because I trusted him. And I did not know yet that trust and protection could be the same gesture from different directions. Wade looked at her. He was afraid for you, he said. He was afraid for me, she agreed. And he left me alone in the dark instead, which is its own kind of danger, and he should have known better. She said it without heat. Just the truth she had been completing the journey toward for 2 years. I am not angry with him. I understand what he did, but understanding is not the same as agreeing. A beat passed. Clara said something like that to me once, Wade said. About Eleanor. That understanding why something happened and accepting that it happened were 2 separate tasks. He set down the coffee cup. She was right. It took me a year to work out that she was right. And that was that conversation. 2 people at a desk in the early morning passing each other, small, carefully held pieces of difficult things. Not resolved. Not declared. Just placed in the room together and acknowledged. The door opened. Not Wade's door this time. Not slow. Not with the calibrated courtesy of a man managing his entrance. Harlan Voss came in as if the office were a room he used regularly, which in some practical sense it was, because men with Voss's resources and Voss's relationships with people like Mayor Tuck tended to treat civic spaces as extensions of their own property. But today was different. not the clothes. The charcoal vest was impeccable as always. The gold watch chain, the hat in his hand, the same practiced gesture of apparent humility. But there was something underneath it today that had not been present at Clara's. A quality of controlled urgency barely visible. The way stress showed in very disciplined men, not in their face but in the efficiency of their movements. Everything slightly more precise than it needed to be. A man who had decided exactly where every part of himself was going to be, and was maintaining that decision with effort. He had not expected both of them here this early. She read that in the half-second before his expression settled. Then it settled completely, and the warmth was back. Mrs. Cross. Sheriff Calloway. He looked at the maps on the desk and away from them in one smooth motion that was almost natural. I heard there was some activity at the office this morning. I wanted to check in, kind of you, Wade said. Neutral? Flat, we're concerned, Voss said. The we was Tuck, who appeared in the doorway behind him now, slightly breathless, slightly late, which was somehow worse than arriving together would have been, as if Tuck had been told to come and had hurried to catch up. Mrs. Cross has been through a serious ordeal. Head injuries can produce lasting effects, memories, interpretations. He turned to Elara with an expression of sincere concern that was, she had to admit, extremely well made. I would not want to see you put yourself through additional stress on the basis of something that might resolve itself with proper rest. She looked at him. She had looked at him the same way yesterday at Clara's, and he had held it without difficulty. Today his eyes moved to the desk for 1/4 of a second. That was the difference. Yesterday he had not known about the maps. Mr. Voss, she said, my husband died at Redstone Canyon. I was found at Redstone Canyon. You have been attempting to purchase the western parcel of my property for 2 years. She let that sit for exactly one breath. At what point does coincidence become pattern, in your experience? Something happened in the room, not dramatic. Voss did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. His expression did not change in any way that most people in the room would have noticed. But his hand, the one holding the hat, rotated it once. A single rotation, quick, stopped. She had seen him do this at Clara's. She had catalogued it then as a habitual gesture, the practiced humility of a man who used hats as props. She catalogued it differently now. Patterns require evidence, he said, pleasantly. Yes, she agreed. They do. A pause that lasted slightly longer than comfortable. Tuck filled it, which was his function. Now, Mrs. Cross, I don't think anyone is suggesting anything improper. We simply want to ensure that the sheriff's resources. Mayor Tuck, Wade said. Tuck stopped. I will investigate what requires investigation, Wade said. That is the function of this office. I will do so through appropriate procedure. If you have a concern about the use of county resources, you may submit it in writing to the county commissioner. He looked at Voss. Is there anything else? Not a question. Voss looked at him for a moment with an expression that was still pleasant and was, underneath the pleasantness, something much colder doing its calculation. Then he put his hat on. Of course, he said. I appreciate your diligence, Calloway. Mrs. Cross. He nodded to her. A small nod. Precisely sized. I hope you feel better soon. He left. Tuck followed, which meant Tuck had no independent orbit, only Voss's gravity. The door closed. Elara looked at the desk. He saw the maps, she said. He saw the maps, Wade confirmed. He knew which desk they were on before he looked away from them. Yes, he will act faster now. Wade was already standing, moving to the small cabinet on the side wall, where he kept the county survey documents. Which is why we need to move faster. He pulled out a folded map and brought it to the desk, laying it over the other two. The county survey, detailed, official. Show me where the northern path is. The one Thomas found. She leaned forward and found it with her finger, tracing the line that was not marked on any official document, because Thomas had found it by accident in their first winter, and they had kept it the way you kept things that felt like yours. The cut that ran from the high ground behind the north ridge down to the back of the Cartwright mine property. Not a road. An old deer trail that had been widened by seasonal water and narrowed again by drought, invisible from any approach because the sage grew over it from both sides. Wade studied it. This comes out behind the loading structure, he said. You can see the interior approach from the upper section. She moved her finger up the line. There's a flat rock that Thomas used as a rest point. Clear sight line north and east. He nodded, said nothing for a moment, then Professor Ford. She had been thinking the same thing. Ford arrived within the hour, slightly breathless. his khaki vest dusty at the elbows from wherever he had been at this hour, which turned out to be the eastern ridge, where he had apparently been before dawn, with his survey glass conducting observations that no one had asked him to conduct, but that he had conducted anyway, because that was the kind of man he was. He set his notebook on the desk without preamble. "Unmarked wagons," he said. "Last night. I was not expecting them, which is why I didn't have the camera. But I have the sketch." He turned to a page, quick, confident pencil lines. 3 wagons. The mine entrance in the background. A man standing at the center directing movement. Face not clearly visible at distance, but posture captured with the accuracy of someone who had been drawing field observations for 20 years. "I don't know him." Wade looked at the sketch, his jaw set in the specific way she had come to recognize. Not surprise. Confirmation of something unwelcome. "He is not local," Wade said. "He comes from operations considerably larger than Voss's land scheme. Whatever is moving through, that mine has connections that extend well past this county." She looked at the sketch and then at Wade and understood what this meant. "It's not about the land," she said. "The land is part of it. Your road access is necessary to the operation." He folded the survey map along its original creases, precise and economical. "But the land was always a means, not the end. The end is whatever is in those wagons," which remained unnamed, which was, she realized, its own kind of information. Whatever it was the kind of thing that careful men did not name aloud in rooms where the conversation might be remembered. "Seth Garner found the deed irregularities," she said. "Multiple properties, all transferred to Voss subsidiaries over 3 years. He wasn't just acquiring land, he was building a corridor." "Yes, and Thomas saw the transfer, and Seth found the paper trail, and both of them needed to be removed before anyone connected the 2 ends of it. And you," Wade said, "are the current owner of the one piece of land he has not yet acquired, which sits precisely between the mine and the border canyon roads." Ford was listening with the particular quality of attention he brought to significant observations, the focused stillness of a man filing everything for later use. He said, "There is something else." He turned another page in the notebook. 3 weeks of observations. Sable's movement patterns charted with the meticulous regularity of a man who tracked animal behavior for scientific purposes. The lines on the page showed a consistent circuit around the Cartwright mine perimeter. Not grazing patterns, not territorial behavior in any conventional sense. "He moves in the same direction at approximately the same intervals," Ford said. "Between 2 and 4 in the morning, which correlates with the wagon activity I have observed. He positions himself at the highest point of elevation relative to the mine entrance." He looked up. "I have been a naturalist for 20 years. This is not natural horse behavior." Elara said nothing. Because she had stood at her bedroom window in the night and watched a black horse stand where a man had stood who had witnessed her husband's death, and she had already made her peace with the category of thing that could not be explained and could only be accepted. "He was at my window last night," she said, "standing in the exact position where I found boot prints after Thomas died." Ford received this without the skepticism she had half expected from a man of science. He wrote it in the notebook, date, time, location, noted as observation, which was, she thought, the right thing to do with things you could not explain. You did not dismiss them. You wrote them down and waited to see what else they added up to. The morning moved through its business around them. Elara and Wade spent 2 hours with the survey maps and Ford's notebooks working out what they knew and what they could prove, and the distance between those 2 things, which was significant. What they knew was substantial. What they could prove in a county court system that Voss had been building his walls inside for years was considerably less. They needed federal authority. Wade was already composing the wire to the U.S. Marshal Office in Prescott in his head. She could tell from the way his silences were becoming more structured, the pauses of a man drafting language, and then the afternoon changed. She was at the north fence line when it happened. She had gone out after the morning meeting because the fence needed checking, and because she needed to do something with her hands, and 2 posts near the northern boundary had been loose for a week. She reset them with the methodical satisfaction of physical work, the mallet finding its rhythm, the wire pulling taut. She was on the 2nd post when the feeling arrived. Not sound, not movement she could identify. Something older than those, the specific awareness of being observed that the body registered before the mind caught up. She kept working, did not turn her head, reached for the next staple, drove it, moved along the wire naturally, the way a woman who was only fixing fence would move. When she finally looked up, turning her head in the way a person looked up from work without purpose or urgency, the ridge was empty. She went back to the post, and found in the patch of ground behind the fence that the morning's work had left with the surface disturbed, a single boot print. Recent, the same iron sole she knew from the canyon rim. The same depth, the same weight. Someone had been standing here watching her, and had been here before she arrived. She finished the fence, because leaving unfinished work was a signal, and she was not in the business of sending signals. Then she rode back to the house at her normal pace and put the mare in the corral, and went inside and stood in the kitchen, and thought about the boot print and what it meant. It meant Alcott or one of his men had been watching this fence line. Watching her, regularly enough to have established a position. It meant whatever Voss had decided after seeing the maps this morning, Alcott had already been assigned to it before that. It meant the escalation was not a response to this morning. It meant it had already been planned. She was standing at the kitchen window thinking this through when the smell hit her. Smoke, not kitchen smoke, not chimney smoke. The specific thick orange quality of structural burning, of old dry timber catching and not letting go. She turned the stable. The back wall was lit from the inside, visible through the gap in the doors as a solid rushing orange, and above the roofline a column of black smoke was building with the speed of something that had been set deliberately and given time to catch before anyone was meant to notice. She ran. Not toward the house for water, because there was no time for that mathematics. Toward the stable, because her horses were inside. The heat hit her 10 feet from the door. She pulled her vest up over her nose and went through anyway. Inside, brightness on the back wall, moving fast along the dry timber. Her 3 horses against the far rail, pressed together, the whites of their eyes showing. The smell of their fear, sharp and animal and absolutely unmistakable. She did not call to them. She moved. She got to the 2 working mares and got them moving by force of presence, body between them and the back wall, pushing forward, getting them to the door where the air was, and the light outside was different from the lights inside, and they went because they had no other choice. 2 out. The gelding was different. 18 years old. He had seen things. He had seen the night Thomas came home from wherever he had been the night he died, moving differently, and had been in the stall next to the mare who had known. He was against the far corner, and he was not going to move, because moving required trusting something, and his trust had been used up. She went to him. She did not grab his halter. She put herself in front of him. Smaller than the fire, smaller than the darkness, but present in a way that was not the fire and not the dark. She said, "I know." 2 words. She had no idea if he heard her over the roar, but he turned his head. She took the hem of her skirt and covered his eyes with it, not seeing the fire, not seeing the door. Just the fabric and the smell of her and the pressure of her hand on his jaw. She walked. He walked. She felt the heat of the back wall like a physical hand pushing between her shoulder blades. And she did not run, because running would break what she had made between them. And she walked and he walked, and the door was there. And then they were through it, and the cool evening air hit her face, and she kept walking until they were clear. And then her legs told something she would not acknowledge until she found herself sitting on the ground with one hand on the gelding's leg, and no memory of deciding to sit. She breathed. The stable's roof gave way with a sound she felt in her chest more than heard, a compression, a collapse, orange light erupting upward into the darkening sky. Pruitt was there. He had come from somewhere. He had the 2 mares secured to the fence. He came and stood by the gelding. He said nothing. He just stood there, which was the right thing to do. She got up. Her dress was singed at the hem. There was a burn on the back of her left hand that she had not noticed acquiring. Her ribs had something sharp to say about the past 10 minutes that she received, and set aside for later. She looked at what was left of the stable. The walls still standing, but the interior gone. Orange and black, smoke pouring into the sky. Thomas had built that stable in the summer of 1876. He had done the framing himself, and she had helped with the boards, and it had taken 3 weekends, and they had been tired and satisfied at the end of each one, she thought. Voss moved faster than I expected, she thought. Not because I wasn't expecting it, because seeing the maps this morning moved his timeline up, she thought. Which means I moved his timeline. Which means I was right about what the maps meant to him. Which means I was right about all of it, she thought. That is a cold comfort, and it is also the only comfort available, and I will take it, she said to Pruitt. Who was on the road this evening? He said. Alcott's man. Same one I've been seeing on the East End. He paused. Convenient timing. Intentional timing, she said. Yes. She looked at the fire, at the sky above it. Hank, she said, I need you to go through what's left when it's safe to do so. There's a post near the southeast corner that Thomas reinforced differently from the others. Deeper footing. If anything survived, it would be there. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had worked alongside people long enough to know when they were telling him something important in the middle of telling him something else. I'll look, he said. She turned and found Pruitt looking at her with something in his face that was not his usual economy, he said. Found this in the east corner before the roof went. He reached into his vest and held out a folded piece of paper. Didn't burn. Must have been placed somewhere the fire didn't reach first. She took it, unfolded it. Different paper from the note at the canyon. Heavier stock. The kind used in formal correspondence. One line only. In handwriting she did not recognize. Stop looking. Or the house is next. She folded it and put it in her inside pocket. She thought. Voss has shifted from suggestion to instruction, she thought. Which means he is more afraid than I realized. She thought. Good. Wade arrived 20 minutes later, which meant Pruitt or someone had sent word. He came fast, which was visible in the horse he was still settling when he came through the gate, and he looked at the stable, and then at her, and then at the gelding standing quietly by the fence, and at the burn on the back of her hand. He said, Are you all right? Not are you hurt? Are you all right? Which was a different question. She said, I'm going to need to rebuild. He stood for a moment, looking at what was left of the structure, at the smoke still going up. Then he said very quietly, I should have moved faster. She turned to look at him. His face was doing something careful. The thing it did when he was feeling something he had not authorized himself to feel. This is not your failure, she said. I have known about Voss's operation for 18 months, and you have been working against a system he built before you arrived. She held his gaze. Moving faster without evidence would have given him grounds to remove you. And without you this would already be over and not in my favor. She paused. I am not interested in distributing blame tonight. I am interested in what we do next. He looked at her. The fire crackled behind her. The gelding stamped once, settling the note, she said, and gave it to him. He read it, folded it, put it in his own pocket, which she noted was for evidence purposes and not because he was taking possession of her business. He's moved from property crime to direct threat, Wade said, which means he's lost patience. She crossed her arms, an adjustment her ribs immediately protested, and she ignored. Or he's lost something else. Confidence that the quiet approach is going to work. Ford's wire, Wade said suddenly. She looked at him. I asked Ford to send a preliminary wire to his contact at the St. Louis paper 2 days ago. Not an article. Just a query, establishing that a story might be coming. He paused. If Voss has any kind of contact in the press community, he would have heard about a journalist asking questions about Arizona Territory land schemes. She understood this immediately. He knows the story is forming. Not just a local widow complaining. An actual account with photographs being offered to a major paper. Which changes what silence buys him, Wade said. Removing you locally no longer resolves the problem if the problem is already going to print. She looked at the ruins of the stable. So burning the barn wasn't about scaring me into selling, she said slowly. It was about disrupting what I was doing, slowing me down, or drawing you out to see what you would do, who you would contact, what you would reach for. She thought about this. She thought about the boot print on the fence line, the watching. Not just watching her, but watching what she did next. Voss was not panicking. He was reading the situation as carefully as she was. He was simply reading it from a position of considerably more power, and was adjusting that power's application based on what she showed him. She needed to stop showing him. I need to not be predictable, she said. Wade looked at her. Whatever he expects me to do tonight, she said, I shouldn't do it. He expects you to stay in the house, Wade said. Be frightened. Wait. Then I shouldn't wait. He was quiet. She turned toward the ridge, the north ridge, where in the last of the light she could just make out a shape. Still, watching. The scar catching the very last horizontal light. Sable, but different tonight. Not in his usual position at the far rail or at the high point of the ridge. Closer. Halfway down the slope at the edge of the sage, head up and ears forward, and his whole body oriented not toward the stable or the fire or Elara. Toward the north. Toward the cut that ran from the high ground down to the back of the Cartwright mine. She stood very still, she thought. He went out that direction tonight before the fire started, she thought. The wagons move between 2 and 4 in the morning, she thought. Ford said the man in the sketch was directing a transfer, she thought. Seth Garner has been missing for 12 days. She turned to Wade. Tonight, she said. Not the mine. The observation point. Thomas's flat rock on the northern path. She held his gaze. I want to see what is actually moving through there. Before we send any more wires, before we file anything. Before we give Voss any more information about what we know. She paused. We need to see it ourselves. He was quiet for the length of time it took the wind to shift, and bring the smell of the burnt stable across the yard, and then shift again and take it away. Then he said, Not tonight. She started to speak. Not tonight, he said again, and the repetition was not stubbornness. It was something else. Because tonight Alcott knows you are awake and responding, and angry. Tonight they will be watching every approach to that mine more carefully than any other night this week. Going tonight is how we get caught. He looked at her steadily. Tomorrow night. After they've settled back into the expectation that the fire did what it was meant to do. She considered this. It was correct. She did not want it to be correct because she wanted to do something with the anger that was currently occupying the place in her chest where the stable used to be. But it was correct. Tomorrow night, she said. Tomorrow night, he agreed. And that was the decision. Pruitt stayed at the property. Wade walked the perimeter with him, the two of them moving through the dark, in the efficient shorthand of men who had done similar work before, and trusted each other's judgment about what required attention. Elara went inside. She made herself eat. Bread and the preserved peaches from Clara's basket, still in the kitchen from 2 days ago. She sat at Thomas's desk, and she took out the journal and she wrote by lamplight. Not her feelings about the fire. The facts of it. The timing. The note. The bootprint at the fence. Alcott's man on the east road. The way Voss's hand had moved when she had said the word pattern. She wrote it all down in the order it had happened. Because Thomas had kept records, and the records had survived him, and she intended to do the same. When she finished, she put the journal back in the inside pocket, and sat for a moment, looking at the lamp. Outside, the ruins of the stable were still breathing smoke, in small, tired exhales. She could smell it through the window she had opened for the cool air. She thought about Wade saying I should have moved faster, and the look on his face when he said it. The look of a man who had lost someone to the specific crime of being elsewhere when they needed him, and who had organized his life around not repeating that crime, and who had just stood in her yard watching the smoke of what he had not managed to prevent, she thought. He is going to carry this, she thought. That is not mine to fix tonight, she thought, but it is mine to know about. She blew out the lamp. In the dark, she sat another moment, listening to the sounds of the property settling, the horses quiet now in their temporary arrangement in the far corner of the yard, where Pruitt had rigged a rope line between 2 fence posts, the desert finding its night voice around them, the coyotes and the crickets and the particular quality of wind in sage that was different from wind in any other plant. Then she went to the window. On the north ridge a shape, ears forward, head high, the scar invisible in the dark, but present in the way she had come to know his outline, the specific weight of his silhouette against the stars. Sable. Watching the house, she put her hand flat on the glass. He did not move. And somewhere in the way he stood, in the absolute stillness of him against the Arizona night, she felt something she had not felt in 2 years of managing this land alone, of getting up before dawn and mending what broke and bearing what could not be mended. She did not feel alone. Not rescued, not protected in the way that required her to be smaller. Something different. Something that had no clean name, but felt like the difference between carrying a thing by yourself and carrying it with someone walking beside you who was not taking it from you, just present while you carried it. She took her hand off the glass. She went to bed. She did not sleep immediately. But when sleep came, it came fully, without the fractured quality of the past several nights. And she did not dream about rope or fire, or the sound a stable roof made when it gave way. She dreamed about the northern path, the flat rock where Thomas used to rest, the way the canyon looked from that elevation, the whole of it visible, nothing hidden. She dreamed about seeing the whole of it, and in the dream she was not afraid of what she would find. They did not find Seth Garner that night. They found evidence that he had been there. A length of rope, a tin cup, a wool blanket folded with the kind of careful neatness that a man maintains when he has very little left to control. The wooden structure at the edge of the mine property was empty when Wade and Ford reached it, the door hanging open on one leather hinge, the interior smelling of confined air and old fear. Gone. Moved. Deliberately relocated before anyone could reach him. Which meant someone had seen them coming. Which meant someone had been watching the ridge. Elara sat her mare on the northern path and watched the lantern light in Wade's hand move through the structure. Watched it come out the other side. Watched it stop. And she knew from the stillness of it what he had found, or rather what he had not found, before she rode down to hear him say it. They gathered at the base of the structure in the pre-dawn cold. 3 people and 2 horses and a very large problem. He was here, Ford said. He had his notebook out by force of habit, recording what the lantern showed him even when what it showed him was absence. Recently. The blanket is still warm. Wade said nothing. He looked at the rope. He looked at the empty space on the floor where a man had been kept for 12 days. His jaw was set in a way that went beyond professional frustration. Elara said they knew we were coming, yes. Who knew we were meeting today? You, me, Ford. He paused. Clara Reed. Clara did not tell anyone. No, he agreed. Without question. Which meant either he trusted Clara's discretion absolutely, or he had good reason to believe the information had come from somewhere else. Then someone watched us on the ridge this evening. Or someone has been watching you for longer than that, he said. And tonight simply confirmed what they already suspected. This was a significantly worse possibility. It meant the mine surveillance was not passive. It was responsive. Someone was paying close enough attention to Elara's movements that a meeting between her and the sheriff on a ridge at sunset was enough to trigger the movement of a prisoner. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "We need the property documents. Without Seth Garner's testimony, the court records are the only chain of evidence that connects Voss to the original crime. If he has already filed to take the ranch, he has," Wade said. She looked at him. "I found the filing notice on my desk this afternoon," he said. "After you left, delivered by Mayor Tuck's office. Your property is listed as delinquent on 18 months of taxation." He held her gaze steadily. "Which is not possible, because I checked your tax receipts when you first brought the maps to me. Every payment. On time. Stamped. Stamped and filed by a court clerk. By a court clerk who was now missing. He had the receipts removed," she said, "or altered, or the filing shows different numbers than the receipts you hold." He put the lantern down. The flame barely moved in the still air. "Without the originals from the county deed office to compare against, your copies are your word against his documentation. And his documentation is stamped by the same court that just filed the delinquency notice." Elara looked at the empty room, the single cup, the folded blanket. Thomas had known. Thomas had seen the shape of this 2 years ago, had traced the edges of it in his careful hand on those maps. And he had been alone with it, and he had tried to protect her from it, and the protection had cost him everything. She was alone with it now too. Except, she was not alone with it now, which was new, and she was not entirely sure how to hold that newness without dropping it. "The county deed office," she said, "in Prescott. When you file land purchase documents with the territorial deed office in Prescott, a copy goes to the federal record, independent of the county court." Wade looked at her. "Thomas filed that purchase in 1874, she said. "I was there. He sent the documentation to Prescott himself. He made a point of it," he said. She stopped, because she remembered exactly what Thomas had said. He had said a man should make sure his records are somewhere that can't be reached, which she had taken at the time as practical ranching wisdom, and now understood was something more specific, something he had perhaps already begun thinking about even then. He said a man should make sure his records are somewhere that can't be reached. "Prescott," Wade said. 2 days' ride, 1 day if you push." They looked at each other across the lantern light in the empty space where Seth Garner had been kept and was no longer. "Someone has to go," she said. "Yes. And someone has to stay, yes." Neither of them said the next part immediately, because the next part was complicated and they both knew it and had different reasons for the complexity. She said it first. "You go. I stay." She held up her hand before he could respond. "The ranch is mine. My presence there is the only physical fact standing between Voss's filing and an empty property he can walk onto. If I leave, there is nothing to contest. If you stay, you have no authority to retrieve federal documents. She looked at him. You go to Prescott, I stay here. With Pruitt, he said. Immediately. With Pruitt, she agreed. And Ford, and you do not go near the mine. She met his eyes. He held the look for a moment. I mean it, he said. Quietly. Which was different from saying it loudly. Quita was more serious. She was learning his register. I will not go near the mine alone, she said. Which was a precise and accurate statement that answered the letter of his concern, without necessarily addressing the spirit of it. He appeared to hear the distinction, but he did not argue further, because they were running out of time and both of them knew it, and argument was a luxury that tonight had not budgeted for. They rode back in the dark, separated by 30 yards and their own thoughts, and the stars wheeled overhead in their indifferent splendor. And somewhere out in the sage country, Sable moved parallel to them both, at a distance she could not see but somehow consistently felt. Clara came to the ranch at first light. She came without being sent for, which meant Pruitt had gone to her, or she had simply known, which was a thing Clara Reed did with sufficient frequency that Elara had stopped being surprised by it. She came in through the kitchen door and put the kettle on without asking and sat down at the table with the directness of a woman who had something to say and had decided the best way to say it was simply to say it. I have been keeping something, Clara said. Elara sat across from her. She waited, because she had learned that Clara's approach to important things was always from the edge in, and rushing her only sent her further around the perimeter. Thomas came to see me, Clara said, 3 weeks before he died. The kettle was the only sound in the kitchen. He brought something. A sealed letter. He asked me to keep it, he said. She paused. He said if something happened to him, I should give it to you. But only when you were ready to know what was in it. Not out of grief. Out of purpose. Elara's hands were flat on the table. And if he came back for it himself? She said. He said if he asked for it back, not to give it. Clara looked at her directly. Because if he came back asking for it, it would mean he had been made to ask. The kitchen felt very still. He thought they might capture him before they killed him, Elara said. I believe so. And he thought if they made him tell them where evidence was stored, he needed to not know. She worked through it out loud because it helped to hear it. He gave the letter to you so that he could not be made to lead anyone to it. Yes. Elara sat with this for a long time. The kettle began to make its pre-boil sound. A faint agitation under the lid. Thomas had been more frightened than she knew. He had been more organized in that fear than she had understood. He had made a plan that required her to not know things, which had meant leaving her unprotected in a specific way. And she had 2 years of complicated feelings about that which she was not going to try to sort through right now. Right now there was a letter. Clara reached into the pocket of her dress and put it on the table. Thick envelope. Thomas's handwriting on the outside. Her name, her full name, Elara Margaret Cross, which he only used in formal documents. She opened it. Inside, 4 sheets of paper covered in Thomas's hand, dense and precise, with dates in the margins and initials she now recognized and one she didn't. March 14th, 1880. Cross near South Approach, Cartwright Mine, after following wagon tracks from County Road. Observed HV present with D and a third party unknown to me. Transfer of document cases sealed, approximately 8 cases, moved from wagon to interior of mine. Third party signed a paper that DA held. HV shook hands. Transaction or delivery or both. March 21st, 1880. Returned different workers, not local men. Spoke out to SG at County Court. SG said he had found inconsistencies in deed transfer records. Multiple properties in the Canyon area, all transferred to HV. Subsidiaries over the past 3 years. Transfer dates do not align with any public sales or auctions. SG said he was making a record of the inconsistencies. March 28, 1880. SG has been asked to take a leave of absence by Mayor T, no reason given. SG concerned. I told him to keep his copies somewhere safe. I do not know if he did. And then at the bottom of the last page, in writing that was slightly less regular than the rest, as if written in haste or at a different time. If you are reading this, I was not fast enough, or careful enough. Elara, you are the most capable woman I have ever known, and I did not tell you enough, and I am sorry for both of those things at once. The land is yours. The records of the purchase are at the Federal Deed Office in Prescott, filed under the Territorial Land Act of 1871. Your name is on the title jointly. You do not need my signature to prove ownership. You never did. I should have told you that sooner. I should have told you many things sooner. I love you. I'm sorry I was quiet. I was trying to protect you. I know now that was wrong of me. Protect yourself. You're better at it than you know. Elara put the letter down. She looked at the table. Clara had poured the tea at some point and a cup sat in front of her, steaming, and she wrapped her hands around it and held on because it was warm and solid and available, not out of grief, out of purpose. Thomas had known her well enough to specify the condition. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. The way Clara had shown her when Thomas was first brought back, when the ribs of the world had cracked and the only way through it was to breathe in very small pieces. He was protecting me from knowing, she said. Her voice was steady. She was mildly surprised by this, and he was wrong. Yes, Clara said, gently, but without softening it. If I had known in 1880 we could have acted together. Instead he died with it alone, and I spent 2 years not knowing why. Yes, that is. She stopped, breathed. I am not angry with him. You can be both, Clara said. Not angry and also angry, those things coexist. I have been a woman long enough to know that contradictory feelings are not a malfunction. Elara looked up at her. Your name is on the title, Clara said. That is what matters today. My name is on the title at the federal office in Prescott, she said, which is 2 days' ride, and Wade is already on his way there and I am here. Then you hold the ground until he returns. Hold the ground. Yes, that she knew how to do. The holding was the next 3 days, and they were long. Not long the way grief was long, which was long like a winter road with no end visible. Long the way waiting was long when you knew what you were waiting for and you could see the shape of what might go wrong before it did. She kept the ranch running. She fed the animals. She checked the fence. She did the work because the work was what kept the machinery of the place functional, and also because it kept her own machinery functional, and she had learned over 2 years that stillness was the enemy of her particular kind of composure. Pruitt came by morning and evening. He said little, which was one of his best qualities. He checked the perimeter with the practiced eye of a man who had spent 30 years, noticing when things were not where they had been, and reported back in the economical language of a person who understood that a full sentence was not always an improvement on a shorter one. Nothing on the north fence, he would say. Or one rider on the Ridge Road this morning. Didn't stop. Or Voss's man was in town, asking questions at the general store. Small pieces of information. Each one a data point. She was building a picture. Ford came on the second day, with his notebook and his camera case, and the expression of a man who had been awake too long and was not prepared to stop. I went back to the Eastern Ridge last night, he said. I asked you not to do that alone, she said. You suggested I not do that alone, he said. There's a distinction. She decided to be useful rather than write about the distinction. What did you see? The wagons are gone. The mine looks abandoned from the outside. No workers, no lanterns. He set his notebook on the kitchen table. But the horses are still there. Sable and the 2 others, they have not moved from the perimeter. If anything, they are closer. He paused. I think whatever was being stored there has already been moved. To where, that I don't know. He turned a page. But the pattern of the wagon tracks I was able to study before they were obscured suggests they were heading west. Toward the border canyon roads. West. Toward routes that connected to places larger than Dusthaven and more complex than a county court's jurisdiction. She thought about Seth Garner, wherever he was. If they've moved operations, she said slowly, then the mine itself is no longer the primary location. Whatever documents or records were stored there are now somewhere else, which may be why Voss is moving on the property filing now, Ford said. If he doesn't need the mine anymore as an active site, he needs the land itself for different reasons. Or he simply needs you removed before you can testify to what Thomas documented. Both were probably true. Things could be true for more than one reason at once. She had learned this. On the 3rd day, Mayor Tuck came to the ranch, not with Voss. Alone, which was unusual enough that she watched him ride up the gate road from the kitchen window for a full 30 seconds before she went to meet him. He was sweating, which might have been the heat, but it was mid-morning and not yet fully warm. He stood at the gate and turned his hat in his hands in a way she recognized from somewhere. It took her a moment to locate it. Voss did the same gesture, that same hat rotation, when he was calibrating his expression. Except on Voss it was deliberate. On Tuck it looked involuntary, the physical habit of a man who had been anxious for a long time. "Mrs. Cross," he said. "Mayor Tuck." He looked at her. He looked at his hat. He looked at some middle distance between them that contained something he was trying to decide about. "I would like," he said, "to speak with you privately." She opened the gate. He came in and she led him to the kitchen, and she did not offer him coffee because she was not feeling charitable, and she sat across from him and waited. He set his hat on the table. He said, "The tax delinquency filing is false." She did not respond. She waited. "I know it's false because I signed it," he said. "Voss brought it to me and told me what it was for, and I signed it because I owe him a sum I cannot repay by any other means." He looked at his hands. "I have been signing things for Harlan Voss for 4 years. Things I should not have signed." The kitchen was very quiet. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because Seth Garner came to me 2 weeks before he disappeared," Tuck said. He was worried. He had found the record inconsistencies. He told me what he'd found, and he asked me what to do, and he stopped. I told him to leave it alone. I told him the records were probably just misfiled and he should not trouble himself. He looked up at her. He disappeared a week later. Elara held the stillness inside her chest. "You were afraid," she said. "I am afraid," he corrected. Present tense, "I am terrified." He put his hands flat on the table in a way that reminded her, painfully, of herself. "But I am more afraid of what I have already allowed than of what might happen if I stop allowing it," she thought. He's telling the truth, she thought. Or he's been sent here to tell her a truth that leads her somewhere useful to Voss, she thought. "How do I know which one?" she said. "What do you want from me, Mayor Tuck?" "I want to give a statement," he said. "A formal statement. To the U.S. Marshal when Calloway brings him back. I want to put on record everything I signed and why and who instructed me." He held her gaze. "I want to undo as much of this as I can undo." She looked at him for a long time. Men who wanted to undo things were sometimes genuine and sometimes not. But there was a specific quality to Tuck's fear that she believed, not because she was charitable, but because she recognized it. It was the fear of a man who had been living with something too heavy for too long, and whose knees were finally going. "Stay in town," she said. "Do not speak to Voss before Calloway returns. Do not file anything, sign anything, or send any communications that Voss's people could intercept." He nodded. "And if Voss asks you anything, I will tell him nothing has changed," Tuck said. "I have been doing that for 4 years. I can manage a few more days." She let him out. She stood at the fence and watched him ride back toward town in the morning light, a soft, frightened man on a good horse, trying to find the courage that had not been available to him when it would have mattered most. She did not entirely trust him, but she believed him, which were different things. She was becoming quite precise about the difference. That night the trouble came, not from the mine direction, from the east. She woke to the sound of her horses, that specific high agitation they made when something that should not be near them was near them. Not a predator, a different quality of alarm. Her feet were in her boots before she was fully awake, the navy colt in her hand before she reached the door. The corral was lit by the 3/4 moon. Her 3 horses were pressed to the far rail, watching the gate road. Nothing visible on the road itself, but her kitchen window was broken. She processed this from the doorway. The kitchen window faced east. Someone had broken it from outside. Recently, the glass was on the inside of the kitchen floor, which meant the break had been inward. She went around the outside of the house, low and fast, back flat against the boards. Nobody at the window. Nobody in the yard. She went back inside through the kitchen door and took stock. The cedar chest under the bedroom bed had been moved. Not opened, the lock was intact. Moved, which meant someone had found it and had not been able to open it and had put it back or tried to, and had not been entirely successful. The desk drawer in Thomas's study was open. The pens and papers inside shifted, not dramatically, just enough. Someone had been looking for the document cases, for the maps, for the letter, which were all in the inside pocket of the vest she slept in, because she had stopped leaving anything important in any place where it could be found. She stood in Thomas's study and felt something she identified after a moment as fury. Not the cold kind, the hot kind. The kind that came from having your home entered, your husband's desk touched, your property treated as already belonging to someone else. She breathed it through, organized it. They had not found what they were looking for. They would know that in the morning when Voss was told the results of the search, and when they knew that, the next move would not be a search. It would be something more direct. She went to the kitchen and looked at the broken window. Desert air came through the gap. Cool now, warm by afternoon. She had burlap bags in the barn and she put one across the gap and weighted it and told herself she would fix it properly when this was over. Which it would be. Soon. Because Wade had been gone 3 days, and the federal deed office was not a place that kept long hours and required long explanations for a legitimate landowner with legitimate papers. And 2 days' ride was 2 days' ride each direction. And she calculated that he had reached Prescott by the second evening, and the earliest he could return was hoofbeats on the gate road. She was at the door before the sound finished forming, her hand on the gun. The rider came through the gate at a pace that was not emergency speed but was also not patience. She recognized the horse before she recognized the man, and then both. Wade Calloway. Alone. Which was not what she had expected. She opened the door. He was off the horse before it fully stopped, with the efficiency of a man who had been riding hard, and had not yet told his body it was allowed to be tired. He led the horse through the gate, and she noted the animal was lathered, and she noted the set of Wade's shoulders which were carrying something heavier than road dust. "You're back early," she said. "Yes." She waited. "I was detained in Prescott," he said. "Not jailed. Detained. A man from Voss's attorney network found me at the deed office and made representations to the clerk suggesting my inquiry was improper." He looked at her directly. The clerk was willing to be suggested to. He was going to require additional documentation and time, but I had enough of the original filed documents in hand before the attorney arrived. He reached into his vest and produced a folded paper, thick, official, stamped with the territorial seal. The title. Federal copy. Your name and Thomas's name jointly. Filed 1874 under the Territorial Land Act. This supersedes any county court filing. She took the paper. She held it in both hands. It was heavier than paper should be. Or maybe that was just the weight of 2 years pressing back against it. "There's more," he said. She looked up. "I sent the wire to the U.S. Marshal before I went to the deed office." He paused. "Marshal Garrett is already on his way. He left Prescott the same morning I did. Different route, faster horse." A pause. "He should be here by tomorrow afternoon." Tomorrow afternoon. She looked at the paper. At Wade. At the broken kitchen window, which he had not yet noticed because it faced the other direction. She said, "Someone searched the house tonight." His expression changed. "I'm all right," she said quickly. "I wasn't inside. I was inside. I was asleep, and I heard the window break and got up." She paused. "They didn't find what they were looking for. Because it was on you. Because it was on me." He looked at her for a long moment. She had a sudden awareness of how she appeared. Dressed in her sleeping clothes with a vest buttoned over them, and boots and her hair half down from last night's braid, and a revolver in her right hand and a federal title document in her left. She considered whether this was undignified. She decided it was not. It was accurate. "Tomorrow," he said. "When Garrett arrives, we end this." She nodded. "Tonight," he said, and he said it in a different register, quieter, more direct. "I am not leaving this property." She looked at him. He held her gaze with the same steady attention he brought to everything, not asking. Stating. But stating it in a way that left room for her to contest it if she chose, she thought. "I have been alone for a long time," she thought. "I have been managing alone for a long time, and I have been competent at it," she thought. "This is not the same as preferring it." "There's coffee," she said. "If you want it." Something shifted in his expression, small like a door opening a precise and measured inch. "I want it," he said. They went inside. The burlap bag shifted slightly in the window gap where the desert wind came through. The horses in the corral settled, the alarm gone out of them now. The lamp on the kitchen table threw its circle of yellow light across the floor and the walls, and the two people sitting on either side of the table, working through cold coffee and the business of tomorrow. Outside on the north ridge, a shape stood against the stars. Ears forward, head high, watching the house the way he watched everything, with patience and attention, and the particular quality of presence that had no name in any language Elara knew. Sable. Watching. Waiting. Still there, they did not sleep. Not really. Wade took the chair by the door, and Elara sat at the desk in Thomas's study with the lamp turned low, and somewhere between midnight and the hour before dawn, she heard his breathing change and knew he had dropped into the light, functional sleep of a man whose body had simply overruled his intentions. She did not wake him. She sat in the study and read Thomas's letter again, not looking for new information, just being in the presence of his handwriting. The way you sometimes needed to be in a room just to remember what the room felt like. You are the most capable woman I have ever known. She had been 33 when he wrote that. She was 35 now. 2 years of learning, he was right in the way that cost the most. She put the letter away before first light, back in the inside pocket, next to the maps and the federal title, and the small leather journal she had been filling since the rope. Then she went and made coffee. Wade came alert the moment she moved through the doorway toward the stove. Not gradually, all at once, hand moving toward his hip before he was fully upright, which told her everything about what kind of sleep the Pinkerton years had left him with. "Coffee," she said. He sat back. He looked at the window where the burlap still covered the break. He looked at her. He looked at the gray light coming under the door. "What time?" he said. "Early. Marshal Garrett won't be here until afternoon at the earliest." She put the pot on the stove. "But Voss will know by now that last night's search found nothing." "Which changes his timeline." "Which changes his timeline," she confirmed. They drank the coffee standing up, which seemed right. The kind of morning that was not a sitting-down morning. Pruitt arrived at sunup. He came through the back gate on foot, which meant he had left his horse somewhere he did not want seen from the road, which meant he had been paying attention on the way in. Voss's men were at the east end of the road before dawn, he said. Not hello. Just the information. She had always appreciated Pruitt's economy. 3 of them. Just sitting. Not doing anything, just sitting. Watching. "How many total do you think?" Wade said. Pruitt considered. He was a man who did not speculate, he considered. Alcott runs 6 regulars, plus whatever Voss hires particular. Could be 10, could be 12. 3 of them visible on the road, which meant the rest were somewhere else. "Where's Ford?" Elara said. "Sent him to the telegraph office last night," Wade said. "To send a second wire to Garrett confirming our location and situation, and to wire the Prescott Miner newspaper." He looked at her. "Ford has a contact there. Same wire network," she understood this. If the story went public, Voss lost the shadow he operated in. A man like Voss could survive a legal challenge. He had lawyers and money and time. But he could not survive being named in print before the case was even settled. Not in a territory that was still building its reputation for law. "Smart," she said. "Ford's idea," Wade said. Which was the kind of credit a particular sort of man gave without being asked, she noted it. Pruitt had coffee and then went back out to watch the road from the north side of the hay barn, where a gap between 2 boards gave a clean sight line without requiring him to be visible. He had identified that gap the first morning he came by. He had probably identified every useful gap on this property within 3 days of being assigned to check on her. 20 years of practice. The morning moved. Not fast, not slow. With the specific texture of mornings before something happened, when you knew the happening was coming, and you could only do the things you could do and wait for the rest. Elara fed the animals. All 3 horses, the 2 working mares and the older gelding Thomas had brought from his family's property in Colorado the year they were married. The gelding was 18 now, and moved with the deliberate dignity of an animal who knew he had earned his feed and was not going to be rushed about collecting it. She had her hand on his neck when she felt it. The specific quality of attention from outside the corral fence. She turned. Sable stood at the far fence rail. In the daylight he was even more extraordinary than the dark had suggested. She had seen him in pieces in shadow and moonlight and the glare of a sunrise, but the full morning light was different. He was enormous, 16 hands at least, with the deep chest and clean legs of a horse built for endurance rather than speed. The scar on his left shoulder caught the light. Not ugly, just marked. The way Thomas's hands had been marked by work, the way her own hands were marked by work. Visible evidence of what you had survived. He stood at the fence and he looked at her with those dark, direct eyes. And then he looked past her. At the road. At the east end where Pruitt had said the men were sitting. She put the feed bucket down. She walked to the fence, put both hands on the rail and stood across from him, and let him read whatever he read in her face and her posture, the way horses did, with a precision that had nothing to do with language. She said, very quietly, "I know." He blew a soft breath through his nostrils. "Not yet," she said, as if she were telling him, as if he were listening, as if he understood the word yet and was filing it appropriately. She went back to the house. Clara arrived at mid-morning. which had not been arranged but which Elara had expected, because Clara's instincts about when to appear had been accurate for the entire duration of their friendship. She came in, assessed the burlap window cover with an expression that suggested several things she did not say, and put a basket on the counter that contained bread and 2 jars of preserved peaches, and a quantity of medical supplies that she set to one side with a pointed silence. "Just in case," Clara said. "Hopefully not," Elara said. "Hopefully not," Clara agreed. "But I have treated the aftermath of hopefully not enough times to prefer to be prepared for it." They sat together at the kitchen table and Elara told her about Tuck, about his visit, about what he had said. Clara listened without interrupting. Then she was quiet a moment. "He has been afraid of Voss for years," she said finally. The fear looked different from the outside. It looked like loyalty or complicity, but the source of it was fear. She looked at her hands. "I have seen that specific look in men who are being kept, like animals who have forgotten the cage can be left. Do you think he'll hold? I think he is genuinely terrified of what happens to him if he does not." Clara looked up. "Which, for our purposes, is as reliable as conviction. Unreliable conviction and reliable terror, both functional for the moment." The afternoon moved slower. That was the truth of waiting. The last hours before a thing resolved were always the longest, not because time changed but because attention made it feel elastic, stretched thin over the surface of what had not yet happened. Wade checked the road. Pruitt checked the fence line. Ford had not yet returned from the telegraph office, which was either taking longer than expected, or was a reason to worry that she was not going to let herself start worrying about. Not yet. She sat in Thomas's study and she read back through the journal she had been keeping, all of it from the first entry after the rope, reading it the way she had read the fence line in her first years on this ranch, looking for what she had missed on the first pass. She had missed something. The initials DA in Thomas's document. Dean Alcott, she knew now, but Alcott had not been at the mine every night. He had been at the mine on the specific nights when the unmarked wagons came, which meant Alcott was not the manager of the mine itself. He was the manager of the transfer, whatever was being transferred. She thought about this, the sealed document cases, the men who were not local, the fact that when Seth Garner had begun noting inconsistencies in deed records, it was not just the Cross property that had been affected. Multiple properties in the Canyon area, all transferred to Voss subsidiaries. The mine was not a storage point for something that had happened. The mine was an ongoing operation point for something that was still happening. And the reason Voss needed the Cross land was not just to silence her. It was because the Cross property sat between the mine and the most direct route west. He needed the road. She was out of the study and in the kitchen in seconds. Wade came through the door at the same moment, which suggested he had been about to come in anyway, or that the connection she was beginning to have to his timing was developing into something she would not examine right now. "The Cross property," she said before he could speak. "He doesn't just want me removed. He wants the land because it controls the road access west from the mine. The Canyon Road runs through my western parcel. Without my land, the wagons have to go north, which adds 3 hours and takes them through the county seat road where they can be observed." Wade was already nodding. "I worked that out in Prescott," he said, "when I pulled the original survey maps at the deed office. Your western parcel is the only direct route to the border canyon roads. You didn't tell me. I was going to tell you when I got back. You should have told me first. You would have done something about it immediately." She opened her mouth, closed it. Because he was right, she absolutely would have. "What does this change?" she said. "It means we cannot simply hold the property until Garrett arrives and then file the counterclaim on the tax delinquency. It means Voss cannot afford to let the property stand." He looked at her. "He has to move on it before Garrett arrives and before the wire reaches the newspaper. Not because he prefers it, because if he does not, the operation at the mine is exposed regardless of what happens with the land. He'll act today. He'll act today," she breathed. Outside she could hear Pruitt's boots on the gravel of the barn side, the horses in the corral, the sound of Arizona doing its ordinary afternoon things, regardless of what was being decided inside this kitchen. "How long until Garrett?" she said. 2 hours. 3 at the outside. 2 or 3 hours. Which was a different kind of calculation than she had been making. She looked at Wade. He was looking at her with the expression she had been coming to know. The one where he was doing the calculation too, and they were arriving at the same destination from different directions. We cannot wait inside the house, she said. No. If Voss moves and we're inside, he controls the ground around us. Yes, but if we go out to meet them, we're away from the house when Garrett arrives and there is no one to receive him and direct him. Which is why, Wade said, Pruitt stays here. She thought about this. And Ford, she said. If Ford is back. If Ford is back. It was a thin plan. It was the plan available. She got her leather vest from the hook by the door and put it on over her dark shirt, buttoning it with the focused efficiency of a woman who had given up performing calm and was simply being it. She checked the Navy Colt. Fully loaded. She put the remaining cartridges in the vest pocket, which sat beside the inside pocket where everything she needed to survive this legally was stored against her chest. She thought, if something happens to me, the documents are on me. She thought, if something happens to me, the documents are on me and not accessible to anyone else. She thought, I should tell Wade where the pocket is. Inside pocket, she said. Left side of the vest, sewn in, not visible from outside. Everything is there. The maps, the title. Thomas's letter, my journal. He looked at the vest, then at her. All right, he said. Quietly. She nodded. And then there was a sound from the road. Not hoofbeats, not the creak of a wagon. A specific kind of silence replacing the ambient sounds that had been present. The birds, the wind in the fence wire, the small ongoing commentary of the natural world. A silence that meant the natural world had also noticed something was coming. Pruitt appeared at the kitchen door. They're on the road, he said. 6 riders. Voss's men. Alcott leading 6. She had expected more, which meant either Voss had fewer than she had calculated, or the other 6 were somewhere she was not looking. Where's the back road? She said to Pruitt. Not asking. She knew where it was. Asking him if he had checked it. Checked it 20 minutes ago, he said. Clear. Which meant it might not be clear now. She moved to the side window and looked toward the north ridge. Sable was gone from the corral fence. She looked at the ridge. He was up there, just visible against the sky, not moving, watching the east road with the same posture she had seen in him every time. The forward ears, the lifted head, the absolute stillness of an animal that had made a decision and was waiting for the right moment to execute it. He knew. Whatever he knew and however he knew it, he knew. We go out, she said. Meet them at the gate, not inside the property. At the gate on the road where there's open ground and they cannot surround the structure. Elara Wade started. I am the property owner, she said. I stand at my own gate and I tell Dean Alcott that there is a U.S. Marshal arriving within 3 hours, and that anything that happens here today is being witnessed and documented. She looked at him. That is my part. Your part is to stand next to me with the badge and mean it. A beat. That's a short plan, he said. It's the honest plan, she said. Which is the only kind I know how to make. Another beat. Then he put his hat on, checked his own weapon, and moved toward the door. They went out. The Arizona afternoon hit them with its full weight. Brilliant. Hot. The kind of light that pressed down on everything and left no shadows worth hiding in. Good in a way. No shadows for anyone else either. The gate road was maybe 200 yards from the house. They walked it without hurrying. Elara in her dark vest and boots, hair pinned close, the Colt on her hip visible because she chose for it to be visible. Wade beside her, one step back and to the right, in the position of a man who was there to be seen but not to take the front. Because the front was hers. 6 riders on the road. Dean Alcott at the center, which told her something about his psychology. The kind of man who put himself at the center of an arrangement so the arrangement radiated outward from him. He wore a duster the color of dried grass and he had the heavy, patient look of a man who had done a variety of unpleasant things in the service of Voss's interests, and had developed a certain equanimity about all of them. They stopped when she and Wade reached the gate. She put her hands on the gate post, not reaching for the gun, just placing herself. She said, Mr. Alcott. He said, Mrs. Cross, you need to step aside. We have papers from the county court authorizing our access to this property. You may have papers from the county court, she said. I have a federal land title registered under the Territorial Land Act of 1871. It supersedes county court authority on property ownership matters. She did not raise her voice. The afternoon was quiet enough that she did not need to. A U.S. Marshal is arriving within 3 hours with a federal review order. I recommend you and your men be somewhere other than this road when he gets here. Alcott looked at her. She looked back. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, thick-handed, the kind of physical presence that had been useful to Voss in situations that required physical presence. He looked at her the way a man looked at an obstacle he was calculating whether to go through or around. "You don't have a marshal coming," he said. "2 wires sent," Wade said from behind and to her right. His voice was even. Matter of fact, the voice of a man stating a documented truth. "One from Prescott, one from town." Both confirmed. "Garrett left Prescott yesterday morning." Alcott looked at Wade, at the badge. Then he looked back at Elara, and something shifted in his expression. Not retreat, not agreement, a recalculation. The specific look of a man who had been given instructions that no longer matched the situation he was standing in. He turned his horse. He said something to the men beside him too low for her to hear, and then they turned, all 6, and rode back down the road in the direction they had come. Just like that. She stood at the gate and watched them go. Her hands on the gate post were steady. Her ribs ached from the tension she had been holding in her torso without being aware of it. Her heart was doing something she would describe later to Clara as enthusiastic, she thought. That was too easy, she thought. That was much too easy. And then from the north, the side she had not been watching, because 6 riders on the road had been very effective at directing her attention east, she heard the sound of hooves. Not 6 hooves. More, she turned. From the north ridge coming down the cut that ran from the high ground to the back of the property, a group of riders, 4 of them, moving fast. Not at a road pace. At a purpose pace, the kind of speed that had an objective at the end of it. The back road. The one Pruitt had checked 20 minutes ago. And in front, leading them down the cut with the ease of a man who knew this land as well as she did. Possibly better. Because he had made a point of knowing it. Harlan Voss. Not sending Alcott's men, not delegating. Here himself in person for the first time without the perfect vest and the gold watch chain and the calibrated smile, in trail clothes. A coat instead of a vest, a rifle across his saddle. The appearance of a man who had decided that the next stage of this did not require performance. She did not run. She turned back to Wade. He had already seen them. He had already moved, putting himself to a right and forward, hand on his weapon. And then from the north ridge, from a point higher than the cut Voss was descending, a sound she had not expected, and would remember for the rest of her life. A scream that was not human. Sable. The black stallion came off the ridge at a full run, not down the cut, straight down the face of the slope, moving at a speed and angle that should not have been possible for an animal that size on ground that steep. His hooves threw up sprays of dry earth and gravel. His mane and tail were fully back in the wind of his own speed. The scar on his shoulder caught the light. He hit the floor of the property 30 yards ahead of Voss's group and planted himself. Just stopped. 16 hands of black horse standing broadside across the only path from the cut to the house, chest heaving, eyes wide and white at the edges, every muscle visible under his coat, radiating a fury and a presence that Elara felt in her sternum from 100 yards away. Voss's horses lost their composure. All 4, at once. The 2 on the outside shied hard left and right. One of the riders went down, not badly but down. The other 2 horses locked up, refusing to move forward, backing and circling despite the men working the reins. Voss alone kept his seat. He was, she admitted it, an exceptional rider. He controlled his animal through the first seconds of the spook and brought it back to something approaching still. But still was not forward. His horse would not go forward. Because Sable was there. 1,700 pounds of black horse, who had decided this was the line. Voss looked at the stallion. Then he looked at Elara. And in that look, across the distance of the yard, in the brilliant Arizona afternoon, she saw it. The thing beneath the perfect vest and the gold watch and the smile and the years of careful, deliberate accumulation. He was afraid, not of her, of what she represented. A woman standing on her own land with a federal title against her chest and a sheriff at her right hand and a horse that would not be moved between her and whatever came next. He had killed Thomas because Thomas was alone. He had put her on the rope because she was supposed to be alone. She was not alone, she said clearly, carrying her voice across the yard to where he sat on his horse. Mr. Voss, I have a federal land title that supersedes your county court filing. I have my husband's written testimony identifying you by name. I have Mayor Tuck, who is prepared to give a full formal statement about everything he has signed on your behalf. She paused. Let that settle. and I have a U.S. Marshal arriving within the next 2 hours. Silence. Of one of Voss's men's horses finally stopping its nervous circling. You cannot, Voss said. Low, controlled. Almost I already have, she said. Wade moved. He moved with the quiet, direct efficiency of a man who had spent years doing this, and knew exactly when the moment had arrived. He was beside her and then past her and then crossing the yard at a pace that was not running but covered ground fast, the badge on his chest catching the sun, and his voice when he spoke carried the authority of the federal appointment behind it. Harlan Voss, you are under arrest by order of the sheriff of this county, pending the arrival of U.S. Marshal Garrett on charges including falsification of public documents, unlawful detention, and conspiracy in the death of Thomas Cross. The name, Thomas Cross, said aloud, in that voice, in that space. Voss did not move for a moment, then his hand went toward the rifle on his saddle, and Sable moved. He did not charge. Nothing so dramatic. He simply stepped forward, one step, and then another, closing the distance between himself and Voss's horse, with that specific, unhurried, inevitable quality he had, the quality of something that had made a decision several hours ago and was only now arriving at the point of it. Voss's horse shied hard right. Voss went sideways, caught himself, and in catching himself his hand came off the rifle, which was enough. Wade had his weapon clear. Alcott had come back around the south side of the house. She heard him, but Pruitt was already there. She heard that too, and Ford was back. She heard 3 voices from the south, and only one of them was Alcott's. And Elara Cross walked across her own yard in the afternoon light, and she stood 6 feet from Harlan Voss, and she looked up at him on his horse and he looked down at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she said, "Get down." He got down. His hands were steady, she would give him that. He had the self-possession of a man who had been building toward a specific kind of power for years and had only just understood it was over. That took a certain quality of character to absorb without breaking open entirely. She did not respect it, but she noted it. Wade had the cuffs on him before he fully registered they were coming. Behind the house, the sounds of Alcott's men resolving, Pruitt's voice low and certain, Ford calling out something she couldn't quite catch. Not chaos. Resolution. The specific sound of a situation being concluded rather than expanded. She looked at Voss. She said, "My husband died at Redstone Canyon 2 years ago. His name was Thomas Evander Cross. He was 41 years old. He was a good man who made one mistake, and that mistake was not telling me what he knew." Voss said nothing. "I am telling you his name," she said, "because I want you to know that I know it, and that I will say it in every legal proceeding that follows this one until there is no way for anyone in this territory to not know it." She turned away from him. The afternoon was still brilliant, still hot, still Arizona, indifferent and immense and older than anything happening in it. She walked back to the center of the yard. Sable was standing there. Not at the fence, not on the ridge. In the middle of the yard, as if he had simply decided that was where he was supposed to be. She walked up to him. She put her hand flat on his chest, over the heartbeat that was still elevated from the run, still working its way back toward calm. He lowered his head, pressed his muzzle very gently against her shoulder. She stood there. She did not cry. She thought she might in a moment. She thought she might later, when there was room for it, when the taut wire of the past several days finally had permission to release. But not now. Now she just stood with her hand on the chest of this extraordinary animal in the yard of her own home, and she breathed, and the world continued its business around her. Wade came to stand beside her. Not close. The appropriate distance. The distance of a person who wanted to be present without demanding anything from the presence. She said, without looking at him, "Thank you." "You did most of it," he said. "I did my half." A pause. "Yes," he said. "You did your half." Pruitt appeared from the south side with Alcott in tow, hands bound with his own belt, which was Pruitt's preferred method and had the advantage of being immediately available. 2 of Voss's other men were walking ahead of Ford, whose camera case was somehow still intact and on his shoulder, which said something about Ford's priorities. Alcott looked at Elara as Pruitt walked him past. She looked back. He looked away first. The 4th man, the one who had gone down when Sable spooked the horses, turned out to have a broken wrist and was sitting against the fence post holding it, with the resigned expression of a man who had ridden into a situation that had not gone as advertised. Clara would see to the wrist, because Clara was Clara. The gate road was quiet now. The afternoon birds had come back to their commentary. The fence wire caught the light the way it always did at this hour. She heard it before she saw it, hoofbeats on the main road, multiple horses, moving with the organized pace of official travel. She turned to the road, 3 riders, the lead one wearing the badge of a U.S. Marshal, broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, with the look of a man who had covered 2 days of hard ground in 1.5 and was prepared to do whatever was required next. Marshal Garrett. He came through the gate and stopped, took in the scene with the systematic eyes of a man professionally accustomed to arriving at situations in progress. He looked at Voss, hands cuffed, standing in the yard, at Alcott, at the collected arrangement of the situation. He looked at Wade Calloway Garrett. Wade tilted his head toward Voss. Harlan Voss, Dean Alcott, charges as wired. Garrett dismounted. He was not a man who wasted movement or words. He looked at Elara. Mrs. Cross, he said, I understand you have federal documentation. She reached into the inside pocket of her vest, the one Thomas had not known about because it had not existed when he was alive. She pulled out the folded federal title and held it out to him with steady hands. He took it, read it with the focused efficiency of a man familiar with territorial land documents. He looked at Voss. Voss looked at the ground. All right, Garrett said. He handed the title back to her. We'll need statements this evening if you're able. I'm able, she said. He moved toward Voss and Alcott with the 2 men who had ridden with him, and the business of formal arrest proceeded with the particular organized efficiency of federal authority, which was different from county authority in the way that a well-made thing was different from a hastily assembled one. Deliberate, durable. She stood in the yard and watched it happen. Sable was still beside her. She felt his warmth on her left side, that enormous calm presence that had been appearing and disappearing in her life since the morning she had woken up on a rope. She put her hand on his neck, she thought. Thomas died trying to protect me from knowing, she thought, and in not knowing, I was more vulnerable than I would have been if I had known, she thought. There is a lesson in that which applies to more things than dead husbands and corrupt landowners, she thought. I will think about that later. For now she stood in her yard with her hand on the neck of an impossible horse, and she watched Harlan Voss be walked to a federal horse, and she thought about Thomas's handwriting, and about the way the lamp had looked in the mine's abandoned structure, and about a man named Seth Garner, who was somewhere out there and whom she had not yet found. That was the next problem. There was always a next problem. But she was beginning to understand that next problems were manageable. What was not manageable was the problem you did not know you had. The sun moved west, the yard filled with the long shadows of late afternoon, and in the distance, coming from the direction of the Border Canyon Road, which she now knew was the route the wagons had been using and which she now knew she controlled, a different quality of movement. Not riders. A man on foot, moving slowly, helped by another man whose outline she recognized after a moment as one of Garrett's deputies, who must have taken the western road on approach. She looked at Wade. He was already looking. The man on foot was thin in the way that confinement made men thin. 18 days, she thought. He has been in there for 18 days. He wore clothes that had been worn too long. He moved with the careful, testing steps of someone relearning what ground felt like under their feet. Seth Garner. Alive. Elara Cross let out a breath that she had been holding, in various forms for 2 years. Not all of it, not everything. You did not let go of everything at once, and she knew this, and she did not try. But some of it, a specific named piece of it, the piece that was about not knowing, about standing at the edge of what had happened to Thomas and not being able to see the bottom of it. She could see it now, all of it, the whole shape of it, and it was terrible, and it was over, and she was still standing on her own land in her own boots with her name on the federal title in her pocket, and Thomas's voice in a letter that said she was the most capable woman he had ever known. She walked toward Seth Garner, because he had been somewhere dark for 12 days, and he needed to be somewhere light, and because this was her land, and because the next thing and the thing after that was hers to walk toward. Sable watched her go. Then he turned, and walked, with the unhurried certainty he brought to everything, toward the open gate. Not running, not fleeing, just moving, the way he moved, as if he knew exactly where he was going, and there was no reason to hurry about it, because wherever he was going, he had already decided, and decisions like that did not require speed. She did not call him back. She watched him pass through the gate, watched him cross the road, watched him climb the north ridge, that specific gate unhurried and immense and impossibly graceful, for something that large. At the top of the ridge he stopped. Against the last of the afternoon light, his silhouette was absolute, perfect. A shape that looked like it had been there since before any road or fence or deed record had existed in this country. He stood there for a moment, then the light shifted and he was gone. The statements took 4 hours, not because Elara was slow, because truth, properly recorded, required precision, and precision required time. And Marshall Garrett was a man who understood that a case built on documentation was a case built to last, which was the only kind worth building. They sat in the main room of the ranch house. Garrett's deputy, a young man named Collins, who wrote with the focused speed of someone trained specifically for this, took down everything she said in the compressed official shorthand of federal court procedure. Wade sat to one side, not participating, present as a witness to the testimony's conditions, giving it air, giving her room. She told them about the rope. She told them about Sable because it was part of the truth and she did not edit the truth for what people might think of it. She told them about Thomas's maps, about Clara's letter, about the 2 document cases at the bottom of the cedar chest, about the broken window and the searched desk and the specific quality of violation that came with knowing someone had moved through your home touching things that did not belong to them. She told them about Tuck, about Alcott's men on the road, about Voss coming down the north cut with a rifle across his saddle. She told them everything. When she finished, Garrett looked up from his own notes and regarded her with the flat, appraising look of a man in his profession who had heard a great deal of testimony over a long career and had developed reliable instincts about its quality. He said, "Mrs. Cross, you are the most organized witness I have encountered in 11 years of federal service." She said, "My husband kept records. I learned from him." Garrett nodded once. Then he stood, collected his papers, and went to deal with the next piece of it. There was always a next piece. Seth Garner's statement took another 2 hours after that. He was thin and pale and had the disoriented quality of a man who had been inside a dark space for 12 days and was still recalibrating his sense of what outdoors felt like. But his mind was clear, sharper perhaps than it might have been before, in the way that confinement sometimes sharpened the parts of a person that mattered and dissolved the rest. He had kept records too, in his head, every date, every document number, every discrepancy he had found in the deed transfer filings. He recited them to Collins with the methodical precision of a man who had spent 18 days in a wooden room with nothing to do but remember, and who had decided that what he remembered might be the only thing standing between himself and permanent silence. Clara was with him through it, sitting nearby, not as a medical observer, as a person. Because Seth Garner had been alone for 18 days and needed someone to not be alone near him while he did this difficult thing. This was what Clara did, had always done, the unofficial medicine, the kind that did not require a license. Elara watched from the doorway for a moment, then let them be. She went outside. The evening was coming in over the ridge the way Arizona evenings came in. Suddenly and completely, the heat cutting off like a lamp turned down, the sky moving through its colors too fast to name all of them. Orange, apricot, the specific deep coral that only happened in desert country where the dust in the air became part of the light. She stood on the porch and she breathed it in. The yard was quieter now. Garrett's men had taken Voss and Alcott to the secure room in Wade's office, which was the most secure structure in Dusthaven, and would hold them until the paperwork was complete and transport could be arranged to the territorial capital. The other 4 men were similarly arranged. Pruitt had been invaluable and was now, she suspected, sleeping in the hay barn, because Pruitt's recovery method had always been horizontal and in proximity to animals. Ford had disappeared into the room he rented at the far end of town. The camera case went with him. By tomorrow or the day after, the photographs and his written account would be on their way east by stagecoach and then by rail, and within 10 days the story would be in print in St. Louis, and then in other papers that picked it up, and then in the conversations of people who read papers. Thomas's name in print, spelled correctly, in the context of a man who had tried to do the right thing. She had asked Ford specifically to include that. He had said, without hesitation, of course. She sat down on the porch step, the step Thomas had built, wide enough for 2 people which he had said was intentional, which she had understood at the time as a practical man's practical provision for a practical future, and now understood as something more tender than that. She sat on the step he had made wide enough for two people, and she thought about the day ahead. Tomorrow there would be more statements, more documentation. The federal title would need to be formally registered against Voss's county court filing, which Wade had already drafted the counterpetition for, which Garrett would carry personally to the territorial capital, because he was a man who understood which things needed to be handed to someone directly, rather than posted. Mayor Tuck had come by late afternoon before the statements and asked to speak to Garrett privately. He had gone in. He had come out 20 minutes later looking the way a man looked when he had put down something very heavy and was not yet sure he could trust his own legs, diminished, and also underneath that something Elara recognized as relief, the kind that came after confession, not absolution, just the relief of no longer carrying it alone. She did not feel sorry for him, but she did not feel satisfaction at his diminishment either. She felt neutral about him, the way you felt about a tree that had fallen across the road, not angry at the tree, just aware that the road needed clearing. The screen door opened behind her. She knew the sound of his boots. She had not known she had learned it until she heard it and knew it was him. Wade sat down on the step beside her, not on the other end, beside her, close enough that the sleeve of his jacket was an inch from her arm. She did not move away. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the ridge. The last light was leaving it, pulling back up toward the sky the way the tide pulled back from shore. He said, "Garrett says the case is solid. Good. The federal title supersedes the county filing without question. The counter-petition will be registered in Prescott within the week." He paused. "Your land is yours." She nodded. "Your land is yours." It should have been a thing that required no saying. It should have been the condition she had lived in uninterrupted for 8 years, the same condition that Thomas had intended when he filed the papers in Prescott and made sure her name was on them. But it had been in question, and now it was not. And the difference between a thing being true and a thing being secured was the difference that Thomas had died in. She was not going to think about that tonight. "Seth Garner," she said. "He'll recover," Wade said. "Clara's confident. He's dehydrated and underfed, but there's no permanent injury." He paused. His testimony alone would have been enough. Combined with yours and Tuck's and Thomas's written record, the case is, he stopped. Started again. "Voss will not walk away from this." "No," she said. "I'll call." "Good." Another. Quiet. The stars were beginning, one at a time, the way they always came, as if arriving to something rather than simply becoming visible, she thought. "I should go inside," she thought. "My ribs still hurt and I haven't eaten since this morning, and I should go inside," she thought. "I don't want to go inside." "You said," she said, without looking at him, "that you had something to ask me. When you came back." He was quiet for a moment. "I did say that. You said it before you left for Prescott." She looked at the ridge. "You came back and you gave me the title, and then there were 6 men on the road and a U.S. Marshal and 4 hours of testimony." She paused. "So you didn't ask it?" "No," he agreed. "Are you going to ask it?" The evening settled around them. A night bird started somewhere up the ridge. The horses in the corral shifted and moved, their hooves soft on the dry ground. He said, "I came to Dusthaven because it was the smallest, most forgettable place I could find. After Eleanor." He said it simply, the way he had learned to say it. "I thought if I went somewhere small enough, quiet enough, I could just work and not want anything else, not risk anything else." She waited. "I was wrong," he said. "About the not wanting. I was not wrong about this place." He looked at the ridge, the fading light on it. "It's not small, it's just exact. The right size." She turned her head and looked at him. He was looking at his hands. "I would like," he said carefully, with the precision of a man who had spent time with the words, "to know you. Not in the context of what has been happening. Not as a witness, or a property owner, or the woman I was concerned about. I would like to know what you like. What you think about when there isn't a crisis." He paused. "What you thought about before." She looked at him. His profile in the last light. The salt and pepper temple. The jaw that was always set slightly serious, even now. Even here on her porch step in the quiet end of a very long several days, she thought. This is the moment, she thought. After 2 years of managing everything alone, this is the moment a person appears, who is asking me not what I need but who I am, she thought. I have forgotten slightly who I am outside of what I need, she thought. That is probably worth exploring. I like the morning, she said. Early, before the heat, when the light is still going sideways instead of straight down. She thought about it. Actually thought about it. I like the fence work. Not because it's pleasant, because you can see it when it's done. She paused. Thomas and I used to read aloud in the evenings. One of us would read while the other did something with their hands. He'd whittle. I'd mend. Another pause. I haven't done that since he died. Wade listened, fully, the way he listened to everything with his complete attention. What did you read, he said. Whatever we had. History. Some poetry, though Thomas claimed not to like it and then would ask me to read the same poems again. She felt something warm and small move through her. He had opinions about Tennyson. What kind of opinions? Complicated ones. Mostly that Tennyson got the sounds right and the meaning wrong. She paused. I thought that was a strange thing to say about a poet. Thomas thought it was the most important thing you could say. Wade was quiet, but it was a listening kind of quiet. Eleanor read, he said eventually. She read everything. Medical books which I understood were useful. History. Novels, which she would summarize to me at dinner with her own editorial additions, which were usually funnier than the novels. He stopped. I have not talked about her like this in a long time. The small things. It's easier to say she died. It's harder to say she read novels and improved them. Elara understood this exactly. It's easier, she said, to keep them in the large frame. The loss, the absence, that's a thing other people recognize. The small things are yours, and if you take them out and share them, something happens to them. Yes, he said, simply, as if she had identified something he had known but not found the words for. But, she said, I think they're meant to be shared eventually. I think that's what they're for. He looked at her. She looked at him. And in the last of the evening light, on the step her husband had made wide enough for two people, something settled into place that had not been in place before. Not dramatic, not announced, just present. The way the night came in over the ridge, absolutely and without ceremony. She said, Wade? He said, yes. Ask what you were going to ask. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, would you allow me to come by? Not about the case. Not about the land or the legal proceedings or any of what has been happening. He held her gaze. Just to come by, she thought. Just to come by, she thought. 2 years of nobody coming by who wasn't coming because something was wrong, she thought. What would it be like to have someone come by when nothing was wrong? She said, yes. One word. He nodded. Once, and that was the conversation. Small in its vocabulary. Enormous in its weight. She went inside shortly after. Wade walked back to town because there was still work to be done at the office and he was a man who did his work, which was one of the things she had observed about him that she appreciated. Not because she needed him to leave. Just because that was who he was. The work and the person were not separate things. She made herself eat. Bread from Clara's basket and some of the preserved peaches. Cold from the jar, sweet and sharp at once. She sat at the kitchen table and ate and looked at the burlap over the broken window and thought she would fix that tomorrow. Glass had to be ordered from the supply wagon, which came through every 3 weeks, but she could make do with a proper wood panel until then. Thomas had leftover planks in the barn from when he had extended the roof overhang. She washed the jar and put it on the shelf. She went to the desk in Thomas's study. She sat down and she took out the journal and she wrote the date at the top of a fresh page, the way she had been doing since the rope. And then she sat and thought about what to write and found, for the first time since she had started the journal, that what wanted to be written was not an account of events. She wrote, the step was wide enough for 2 people. She looked at that for a moment. Then she wrote, he has very serious eyes, which I previously interpreted as unfriendliness. I now understand is simply how he looks when he is paying attention. He pays attention to nearly everything. She wrote, Thomas would have had opinions about him. Complicated ones. He would have said Calloway gets the silences right, but probably worries too much about the meanings. I think Thomas would have been approximately correct. She stopped. She sat in the lamplight of her husband's study, with her husband's desk under her hands, and a man's name on the page she had just written it on, and she waited to see what she felt about that. What she felt was all right. Not erasing, not replacing. Not the complicated layered thing she had expected the first time she allowed herself to think about another person in any direction beyond practical. Just all right. Thomas had written, "You are the most capable woman I have ever known." And what she heard in that now was not just the loss of him, was also the permission in it. She closed the journal. She went to bed and she slept properly for the first time in several days. She did not dream about the rope. The hearing in Dusthaven was set for 10 days after the arrest, not a full trial. The territorial capital would handle that with proper counsel on all sides and the full machinery of federal law which moved at its own pace and could not be hurried. But the preliminary hearing, the public reading of charges, the formal entering of testimony, this would happen in Dusthaven, because Garrett had determined that the location of the crimes and the witnesses warranted it, and because Elara suspected, he understood that there was a town that had been living under a specific weight and needed to see it formally lifted. Clara spent the 10 days preparing her own testimony. She was thorough about this in the way she was thorough about medicine, which was to say completely, without gaps, with attention to every detail that might be questioned. She sat at her kitchen table in the evenings with Ford, who had stayed to document the proceedings, and walked through what she knew and how she knew it, with the precision of a woman who understood that her words in a federal record were going to matter, and intended them to matter correctly. Ford interviewed Seth Garner for 3 days, not for the legal proceedings, for the account he was writing for the St. Louis paper. Garner turned out to be articulate and careful and possessed of a dry, quiet humor that had apparently survived 18 days in a wooden room, which said something about the durability of certain kinds of character. He was also, Elara discovered, someone who had known Thomas. Not closely, but Thomas had come to the court office in March of 1880 with his survey papers for a secondary filing, and Seth had helped him process the documents, and they had spoken briefly about the canyon land, and about the water rights on the western parcel, and about a peculiarity in the Voss subsidiary deed transfer that Thomas had noticed and asked about, and Seth had said he would look into. He seemed like a careful man, Seth told her, when she came by to check on him at the boarding house where Clara had arranged his room. Methodical. He had read the filings the way most people don't bother. He had questions that suggested he understood what the answers would look like. She sat across from him in the small room with its single window and its narrow bed that Seth was learning to sleep in again after 18 days on a wooden floor. He was, she said. He was a very careful man. He came back a week later, Seth said. Asked if I had found the discrepancy. I told him I had found several. He paused, he looked relieved, and then he looked frightened. And then he said very quietly, "Do not let them know you told me." And then he left. She thought about Thomas on a road in March of 1880, carrying this. Alone. He was trying to build something, she said. A case. A record. Something that could be used later by someone if the original attempt failed. She looked at the window. He just ran out of time. He didn't run out of time, Seth said carefully. The information survived. The map survived. The letter survived. He looked at her, because of where he put them. In the cedar chest. In Clara's pocket. In the places a careful man put things when he trusted the right people with them. She thought about this for a long time afterward. On the morning of the hearing, she dressed with care. Not for Voss. Not to perform anything for the court. For Thomas. For the occasion of his name being spoken into an official record in a way that named what had happened to him accurately. She wore the dark blue dress, the one she had made the winter after he died, which had been both a practical exercise and an act of insistence that she was still a person who made things. The collar was high and white, and she had pressed it the night before. Her boots were polished. Her hair was braided and pinned at the back of her head in the way that Thomas had always said looked like a woman who knew what she was about. She put on her hat. She walked to town. The main street of Dusthaven was already full. Not chaotic. Not festive. Full in the way a town filled when something that mattered to everyone in it was finally being addressed. People on the boardwalks. The barber standing in his doorway. The women from the church auxiliary in a group near the general store. The ranchers from the properties east of town. Men who had watched Voss operate for years and had their own complicated relationship with the weight of it. She walked down the center of the street. She did not look for particular faces. She looked straight ahead, toward the courthouse at the far end, which was a modest wood structure that served as the territorial court when federal proceedings were held in Dusthaven, and as the schoolroom the rest of the year, which said everything about the economy of a frontier town. Clara fell into step beside her. Pruitt was already at the courthouse door. He gave her a nod, the specific nod of a man who had done what needed doing and intended to go on doing it. Ford was at the side of the street with his notebook. Always the notebook. She appreciated that about him. The commitment to the record. Seth Garner was inside, she knew. He had gone early. He was nervous in the way a man was nervous when something important was about to happen, and he needed to be present for it, and was not entirely sure his own body was going to cooperate. Mayor Tuck was also inside. She had not spoken to him since his visit to the ranch. She did not know what to say to him yet. Perhaps there was nothing to say yet. Perhaps there would be something later, when the proceedings were complete and she had time to sort through the complicated texture of it. A man who had known and not acted, and then eventually had. Better late than never was a thing people said. She had her reservation about it as a principle, but she acknowledged it as a fact. Wade was at the front of the courtroom when she came in. He was in his formal clothes, which was to say his usual clothes brushed clean and the badge polished to a point where it caught every available light in the room. He was speaking to Garrett's deputy Collins, with the quiet focus of a man finalizing logistics. He saw her come in. He did not stop what he was doing, but something shifted in his posture, slightly, in a way that she suspected other people did not notice. She noticed. She sat in the front row. The proceedings were presided over by Garrett himself, functioning in the capacity of federal commissioner for the preliminary hearing. He sat at the front table with the same quality of competent solidity he brought to everything. Papers arranged, authority present, no theater. Just the work. Voss was brought in. He looked different. Not diminished exactly. Men like Voss did not diminish easily, but reconfigured. The perfect vest was wrinkled from several days in custody. The gold watch chain was gone. He looked like a version of himself seen in poor light. The same features, the same bearing, but without the surface that had made him convincing. He did not look at her. She looked at him. Steadily. For as long as it took her to decide she had looked at him enough. Then she looked at Garrett. The charges were read aloud, each one in the formal language of federal indictment, precise and heavy. Falsification of public documents. Systematic theft of territorial land grants and deed records for purposes of fraudulent resale. Unlawful imprisonment of a federal court officer. Conspiracy in the death of a citizen, which was the charge that covered Thomas. Which was the charge that, when it was read aloud, made the room very still. She put her hands flat on her knees, breathed. Tuck gave his statement. He stood and spoke in a voice that shook for the first sentence and then found its footing and continued. He named dates. He named documents. He named what Voss had told him to sign and why. It was not a complete confession of a reformed man. It was the accurate account of a frightened one who had finally found that fear cut in more than one direction. Seth Garner gave his statement. He was calm. The 18 days had done something to him that was not only damage. He was also very clear. Very sure of what he had seen and when and why it mattered. Clara gave her statement about the letter, about Thomas coming to her. About what he had said and what she had understood him to mean, and why she had waited and why she had finally given it. And then they called her. Elara Cross. She stood. She walked to the front of the room and she turned and faced the assembled. The whole of Dusthaven, it felt like. Or enough of it. People she had seen at market for 2 years. People who had looked at her with varying degrees of sympathy and suspicion, and the specific discomfort people felt around grief they did not know how to address. She told the truth. All of it. The same truth she had told Garrett 10 days ago, but now here. In public, in the light. Not in a private room with a deputy taking notes. She told them about Thomas. About March of 1880. About the maps he had made and hidden and the letter he had given to Clara and what it said. She told them about the rope. She told them about what she had found in the cedar chest and what it meant and how she had known what it meant because Thomas had taught her how to read a land survey and how to question a document that did not match what she remembered. She told them about Sable. She said it clearly and without apology. A black stallion. Wild. Scarred. Who had appeared at Redstone Canyon and pulled her up from the edge of the cliff, and who had subsequently appeared at her fence and at her window and on her ridge, and who had, by any honest accounting, been present at every significant moment of the past several weeks in a way that had no rational explanation, and which she declined to invent one for. The room was very quiet during that part. She did not look at the room while she said it. She looked at the window. The ordinary window with ordinary light coming through it. She looked at it and she said, "A wild horse pulled me out of a canyon when no person would have reached me in time, and I do not know why. And I have decided that not knowing why does not change what happened." And then she stopped looking at the window and she looked at the room. Nobody laughed. Several people, she noticed, were not quite looking at her. The specific not looking of people who were feeling something they had not expected to feel. She returned to her seat. Garrett concluded the preliminary proceedings with the formal noting that the charges would be held over for trial at the territorial court. Voss and Alcott and 2 of the other men were to be transferred to the capital. The property filing against the Cross Ranch was suspended pending the federal title review, which Garrett noted was entirely in order, and anticipated an unambiguous resolution, and then it was done. The formal part. The room moved. People stood. The particular release of tension that a crowd held made itself known in the shuffle and murmur of 100 people deciding what to do next. She stood, and found herself face to face with a woman she knew slightly, Mrs. Carver, whose husband ran the hardware store, and who had always been pleasant to her, in the way people were pleasant to someone they did not quite know what to say to. Mrs. Carver was 60 or so, solid, with an expression that had moved through several emotions in the past hour and settled on something direct. She put her hand on Elara's arm. She said, "Your husband was a good man. I knew that at the time and I did not say it out loud enough." Elara looked at her. "Thank you," she said. Mrs. Carver nodded. Moved on, then someone else, and then someone else. Not many. Not a parade. But enough. The people for whom something in the room had shifted, and who wanted to register that shifting with something more than silence. She accepted each one briefly, fully, because Thomas deserved to be spoken of by his neighbors, and because she was the one who was here to receive it, and she was capable of doing so, and that was enough. Wade found her outside afterward. The main street was full of the particular bright afternoon light that Dusthaven produced in late summer, dense and direct and absolutely clear. He came and stood beside her on the boardwalk with the comfortable ease of a man who had earned the right to stand next to her, and knew it without needing it confirmed. He said, "Well." She said, "Well." He looked down the street, at the town. His town, in the sense that it was the town he had taken responsibility for, which was the only sense in which a town was anyone's. "Tuck will resign," he said. He told Garrett. "He intends to write a public letter. Will a new mayor be better? Will have a harder time being worse," he said. She almost smiled. "Almost Ford is leaving next week," he said. "The article goes with him. Good. He said to tell you that the account of Sable is going in exactly as you stated it." He paused. He said, and I quote, "I am a man of science, and I am also a man who watched that horse stop 4 riders cold without being touched by any of them, and I am not prepared to omit that on grounds of credibility." She did smile. Small, real. "Good," she said again. A pause. The afternoon around them, she thought. There are things that need doing, she thought. The window panel needs replacing. The north fence has 2 posts that need checking. The filing with Garrett's office needs a formal response within 30 days. She thought. There is time for all of that, she thought. There is time. 3 weeks later. Early. She woke before the sun, which was not unusual, and lay in the bed in the room that had been theirs and was now hers, and felt the specific quality of the dark that comes just before dawn, which was not empty but full, as she had learned, of everything that was about to happen. She rose dressed, braided her hair, and did not put up the braid because it was early, and there was no one to see it. She went outside. The air was cool the way September air was cool in this country, the heat waiting until mid-morning to reassert itself, giving the early part of the day to other qualities. She stood on the porch step, the wide one, and then she went still, something in her body before her mind. She turned her head toward the north ridge. Sable was on the ridge, watching the house, as he had always watched it when he was there, with that particular quality of presence, the forward ears, the lifted head. In the low pre-dawn light he was the darkest thing on the ridge, darker than the sky, a shape that you knew rather than saw. She stood on the step, he stood on the ridge. Neither of them moved, she thought. "You came back," she thought. "You keep coming back," she thought. "I don't know what you are or why you do this, and I have made my peace with not knowing." She stepped off the porch. She walked across the yard, slowly the way she walked when she did not want to change what she was approaching, through the corral gate. Up the slope toward the ridge, the dry grass under her boots, the smell of sage in the cool air. She stopped 20 feet below him. He looked at her. She looked at him. The scar on his shoulder was catching the first light that was beginning to come from the east, pale and horizontal, the very beginning of the day. She said quietly, "I know you won't stay." He did not move. "I know you come and go, and I have no say in it, and no right to any." She put her hands in the pockets of her dress. "I just wanted to be out here. While you're here." The first bird started on the ridge above them, one call, then another further off. She stood in the morning beginning, and she let herself simply be present to what was in front of her. No explanation needed. No account required. A woman and a horse on a ridge in Arizona in the very first minutes of a day. And whatever this was, she was going to stop trying to name it and simply let it be what it was. He stepped forward. 1 step. 2. He put his muzzle against her shoulder. Warm. The specific warmth of something living that has decided you are safe. She put her hand on his neck. She stood very still and let the moment be exactly as large as it was, which was large. Which was, in fact, larger than anything she had the words for. Which was, she had come to believe, the point. Footsteps behind her. Not alarming. She had learned the sound of his boots. Wade came up the slope and stopped a few feet back. She heard him see what she was seeing. He did not say anything. Neither did she. The three of them on the ridge, in the light that was now properly beginning. The sun edging up over the eastern range in the slow, magnificent way it had out here, where there was enough sky to see the whole process of it. Eventually, Sable lifted his head, stepped back, turned, and walked as he always walked, with that unhurried certainty, along the ridgeline toward the place where the sage thickened and the ground dropped away toward the open country beyond. She watched him go, and did not call him back, because that was the nature of the thing. You did not hold on to what was not yours to hold. You received what was given. You let go of what needed to leave. You stood on the ridge in the morning light, and you were grateful for what had come, and at peace with what had gone, and the difference between those two things was the whole of it, was the entire practice of being a person in the world. Wade came to stand beside her. His hand found hers, not reaching, not asking, just finding. The way hands found things that were in the right place. She did not pull away. They stood on the ridge and watched the last of Sable's silhouette disappear into the morning. The weeks that followed were ordinary, beautifully, blessedly ordinary. The window got fixed. She ordered glass from the supply wagon, and Wade came by on a Saturday morning, because he had said he would come by, and he was a man who meant what he said, and they fixed the window together, and then sat on the porch with coffee and talked about the fence line survey she was planning, and about a poem Tennyson had written that she had opinions about, and he listened to the opinions with the seriousness he brought to everything, and then said he thought the poem sounded like something a man wrote when he was trying to convince himself of something he didn't entirely believe. She thought about that for several days. She thought he was right. She told him so. He looked quietly pleased in the way he looked when something matched what he had expected, but he hadn't been certain it would. Clara opened her practice formally. A sign on the door of the building she had rented, painted by the signmaker in town. Clara Reed, physician, no qualifier, no apology, just the fact of it, in clean black letters on white painted wood. The day it went up, a line of people formed that stretched halfway down the block. Not because people had been without medical care, because people had been going to Clara in private for years, and were now allowed to do it in public, and the difference between those two things was considerable. Seth Garner returned to the court office. The clerk who had replaced him during his absence turned out to have made several errors in the intervening month, none of them Voss connected, just ordinary human error, and Seth spent the first week correcting them with the methodical patience of a man happy to have small problems again. Ford sent a wire from St. Louis. The article had run. He had included the account of Sable exactly as she had stated it. He said the editorial response had been, and he quoted considerable. He said he would be returning in the spring to continue his observations. He said the academic paper was being drafted, and he intended to name the stallion formally in the scientific record. Elara read this wire twice and then folded it and put it in the journal. October came in cool and clear. She added a room to the north side of the house. Not a large room, enough room. She drew the plans herself, the way Thomas had shown her, with the measurements exact and the materials listed in the margin, and she hired 2 men from town to do the heavy work while she did the finish work, the floors and the trim and the window fitting, which she preferred to do herself. It was not finished when the thing she had been quietly aware of for several weeks became something she needed to stop being quiet about. She sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in the 2nd week of October, and she looked at her hands on the table, and she did the arithmetic, and she was certain. She thought. She thought. I had not. I had wondered abstractly whether this was possible, whether the life I was living had room in it for this particular. And now, it appears, she thought. Thomas built this table, she thought. That is not a relevant thing to be thinking about right now, she thought. Yes, it is. Yes, it absolutely is. She sat there for a while. Then she stood up and put on her coat and her hat and went out to the corral and did the morning feeding with the precision of a woman who needed to do something with her hands while her mind reorganized itself around a new fact. She was on the 3rd horse when she heard the gate. Wade. He came around the side of the barn with 2 cups of coffee, in that specific way he had now developed, bringing coffee when he came, because she was always already working by the time he arrived, and because it was a small thing, and he did small things without needing them to be remarkable. He handed her a cup. She took it. He looked at her face. He was very good at reading her face. He had been getting better at it for 2 months, and was now, she judged, somewhere around accurate 70% of the time, which was more accurate than most people who had known her for years. He said, "What?" She said, "I need to tell you something." He waited. The horses moved in the corral. The morning light was doing what it did, long and sideways and amber in that particular October way, everything lit from the side instead of from above. She said, "I'm going to need the room to be finished before spring." He looked at her. She watched him understand. Not all at once. In pieces. The way she watched him process things systematically, not slow but thorough, each piece placed before the next was picked up, and then all the pieces in place. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Or rather, she had seen elements of it, the serious attention, the care, the particular quality of his full presence. But not assembled like this, not directed at her for this reason. "Before spring," he said. "November, I think. Or perhaps December." He set down his coffee cup. Carefully, on the fence post, with the exactness of a man managing his hands, because his hands wanted to do something, and he was deciding what. "Elara," he said. "Wade," she said. He crossed the 2 steps between them. He put both hands on her face, very gently, the large warm hands she had noticed from the first morning in his office, and he looked at her with that full, complete, undivided attention. He said, "I will finish the room." She said, "I know you will." He said, and after that, she said, one thing at a time. He looked at her. She looked at him. And then, because they were who they were, and they were here on her land in the morning light, with coffee going cold on a fence post and a room that needed finishing, and a spring that was coming regardless of what anyone decided about it, they both, at the same moment, entirely without planning, began to laugh. Not loudly, not theatrically, the quiet kind, the kind that came from somewhere deep and true and did not need an audience. The morning went on around them, and somewhere on the north ridge in the sage and the clear October air a shape moved against the sky, ears forward, head high, watching as he always had, as he always would.